Prince of Our Lives, Episode 1, by J.T. Uyeda. Chapter 1. Our story begins in the mystical land of Tinseltown, where turn signals are mere suggestions. Smog lingers like a clingy X, and traffic is as slow as Forrest Gump's mind. Thankfully for our protagonist, she drove her trusty silver 2004 Hyundai Elantra down a quiet, darkened street in the early morning when she could avoid most of these problems. Her name was Min Park, a young Korean woman fresh from graduating college in engineering. She was a slim, petite figure with shoulder-length jet black hair and tidy, straight bangs which stopped just above her brows. But what first caught anyone's eye was the small silver lotus flower pendant which graced Min's neck. This morning, it appeared to be a beacon of tranquility amidst her stomach's swirling nervousness, for today was her first day at her first job post-graduation. Min bit her lip as she looked through her front windshield, observing the dark street, which was only illuminated by the sparse streetlights and her car's headlights. She could spot the faint outlines of various business parks and industrial warehouses on either side of the street. Min gripped her car's steering wheel with both hands, clutching it with a sweaty, firm grip pressure as she wondered what could be in store for her this first day. Suddenly, a black cat ran across the street in front of her. Min's eyes widened. Oh, crap! She slammed her foot on the brake pedal. The car screeched to a stop as the cat scrambled out of sight into some bushes across the street. Min exhaled a sigh of relief and blinked. "Black cat," she murmured. "Let's hope that's not a bad sign." She shook her head, exhaled, and stepped on the gas again. But just as she did, another black cat ran across the street. "Whoa!" Min's eyes widened again. She slammed on the brakes. Her body's momentum jolted her forwards against her seatbelt. Min blinked as she bounced back against the seat. "Okay, now that is some seriously weird déjà vu," she muttered, her heart pounding. "Two black cats. That better not double my bad luck." Min exhaled and shook her head. She moved her foot back to the gas pedal and drove onwards. But after a few seconds, Min again spotted something in the middle of the road up ahead. She narrowed her eyes. "What the heck?" she muttered. For a third time, Min's eyes widened. She slammed on the brakes again. The car screeched to a stop. Another black cat sat in the middle of the road, its yellow-green eyes staring up at her. It casually started licking its paw and cleaning its ears. "Okay, I'm not dreaming, right?" Min muttered, narrowing her eyes. The cat glanced up at the car and walked off towards some trees off the side of the road. Min furrowed her brows and watched the cat slink away. She shook her head. Strange. She glanced to the side and saw the other two black cats trotting to join the third cat. Must have been a family then. Min continued driving forwards, shaking her head. She checked her navigation on her phone and continued driving. "In 500 feet, turn left," the monotone female voice said. Min nodded and turned her car into a large parking lot. A large 2-story office building sat in the middle of the lot with a hedge of bushes trimming the perimeter. Arriving at destination, Min pulled her car to the back row of the lot and parked near some trees and bushes. She turned off the car's engine, and the car went dead quiet. The parking lot's lights illuminated her face in an amber-orange glow. The sky was still dark, winking with stars. The chirping of crickets reached her ears. Min looked at her phone and clicked the power button. The phone's screen illuminated, emitting a blue-tinted light. 4:33 a.m., the clock read. Min sighed and set her phone aside on the passenger seat. She closed her eyes, resting. Buzz, buzz. Min opened her eyes and looked down at her phone on the passenger seat. Her phone vibrated in the seat, its screen illuminating the car's dark interior. The screen read, "Mom." She grimaced at the fact that it was a video chat. Min picked up her phone and tapped on the green answer button. Her mother's face appeared on the screen. She had the same black hair as her daughter, but with more rounded cheeks and a more weathered, stern visage. "Hi, Amma," Min said, grimacing a weak smile. Her tone sounded somewhat irritated. Her mother looked concerned. "Are you at the office?" she asked. Min grimaced and nodded. Yes, I got here way more than early enough. I told you Google Maps doesn't lie. Min's mother shook her head. You are always better early than late, Minji. Arriving late is a sign of disrespect. Yeah, I remember, Min said, sighing tiredly. But did I really need to leave 5 hours early? You know, traffic in Los Angeles can be bad. You have to prepare for every eventuality. Your car could break down or there could be a riot. Min narrowed her eyes and shook her head. At 4 in the morning on the freeway, you think there could be a riot? She asked. Min's mother shrugged. It's Los Angeles. There are riots here all the time. Min frowned. I don't know about all the time, she said. You always must be prepared, Minji, her mother said in a lecturing tone. Min sighed, having heard this voice too often growing up. Right, she said, grimacing. Her mother spoke again. Are you sure this is a good company to start working at? $35,000 a year is so little money. Siwoo's told me at Temple that he already makes $200,000 a year as a lawyer, and he's a full 2 years younger than you. Min grimaced. Well, that's Siwoo and this job. This is more me, she said, pausing. Plus, this is just an entry-level position. Once I get more experience, I'll be able to get a higher salary. Her mother sighed. Okay, just promise me you won't sleep your way to the top. What? Min exclaimed indignantly, blushing. Her mother shrugged. I've heard that's what some women do, she said matter-of-factly. Min shook her head violently. Well, that definitely won't be me. Why would you even think that? Just making sure. Min blinked. Right, she said, grimacing. Are you studying for the job, then? You have to give them a good first impression, her mother said. Min nodded. Yep, I made some flashcards and have the book open right now. Min picked up her flashcards from the passenger seat and flipped through them in front of her phone's camera. Good, her mother said, nodding with satisfaction. Let me see your hair. Min grimaced, but tilted her head down, showing her mother her hair. You have a pimple on your forehead. Cover it up. Min sighed. Yes, thank you, she said. Well, I should go study some more then. Okay, make sure you set an alarm so you won't be late, her mother interjected. Min grimaced and nodded. All right, I won't forget. I'll see you later tonight. Okay, just be perfect and you'll do okay, her mother said, flashing a smile at her. Min grimaced a weak smile and nodded. Thanks, she said. Min tapped the end call button. She flicked across her screen and opened her alarm settings. Then she set one alarm at 7:50 and turned off her phone's screen. Min sat back against her seat and closed her eyes. Doubt entered her mind. One alarm? What if your hand accidentally turns it off early? You think that is going to be enough? What if you're late? Said an anxious voice in her head. Min's heart pounded. She blinked and opened her eyes. Well, just to make sure. She picked up her phone, tapped on it, and set 10 more alarms in 1-minute increments. Min exhaled and smiled in relief, her mind now at ease. Min yawned, placed the phone aside on the passenger seat, and adjusted her seat so that she lay all the way back. She lay her sweater over her eyes and exhaled. Her mind raced with thoughts of the future. What will this new job be like? Will my boss and coworkers be cool? What sorts of things will I have to design and come up with? The thought of making something from scratch and seeing her bosses' and clients' smiling faces excited her. But wait, what if I do something wrong? Would I get yelled at? Would I get fired? She bit her lip in nervousness. Oh God, what if they ask me to make a speech? You're not prepared, Min. Min gulped. She adjusted herself in her seat several times, but she couldn't get comfortable. Min shook her head and opened her eyes. She adjusted her seat upright again and reached over to the passenger seat, grabbing her materials, science textbook, and flashcards. Okay, Min, she muttered. Stay calm. You can be perfect. Just be prepared for everything. Yes, that will calm you down. Just prepare. She looked at the first flashcard and read it. Ti-64 titanium is an aerospace-grade metal powder used with selective laser melting printers. After an hour of reading her flashcards, Min's eyes drooped and fell closed. Beep, beep, beep. Min opened her eyes and gasped, her heart skipping a beat. Oh, God, it's time. She turned off her phone's alarm and pocketed it. She adjusted her hair in the car's mirror, her heart pounding and the butterflies in her stomach swirling. More doubts entered her mind. How would this first day go? What if she messed something up? Min opened her car door. A young, skinny Indian man with thick black hair opened his car door beside her. He had a boyish, kind look to him, young enough that Min could see him still being able to pass for a high schooler. He waved at her. Min smiled nervously and waved back. "Hey, are you Minji Park?" the young man asked, his expression curious. "Oh, yeah," Min said, smiling tremulously. "You can just call me Min, though." "Okay, cool. I'm Ravi. Nice to meet you," Ravi said, waving at her awkwardly. "Oh, nice to meet you, too." They shook hands and continued walking alongside each other towards the office building. "First day, right?" Ravi asked, glancing over to her. "I remember seeing you when you came in to interview." Min cleared her throat and nodded. "Yeah, it is," she said. "Nice. I remember my first day. Have any questions?" Min thought for a moment as they stepped up onto the sidewalk near the building. "Oh, well, how do you like it here?" Ravi shrugged. "It's pretty good. The hours are nice and the group dynamic is pretty interesting. We have a good balance between fun and drama, and I think we play pretty well off each other. Kind of like the characters from The Office or Community." Min blinked, not knowing what he was referring to. Ravi continued speaking. "I like to think of myself as a clever and interesting cross between BBC Sherlock and Varys from Game of Thrones. But most find me as annoying and boring as Season 8 Bran from Game of Thrones. People say I'm pretty emotionless, so if you find me weird, it's okay, I'm used to it," he said. Min blinked, her eyes alight in interest. "Oh, okay," she said, kind of taken aback and unsure what to say. "Oh," Ravi said, holding up a finger. "And we have casual dress Fridays, and Greg will get us pizza for lunch, which is fun too." "Oh, cool," Min said, smiling. "Casual Fridays and pizza sound fun." Ravi nodded. "Any other questions?" he asked her. "Oh, well, I've just been wondering, why is the company called Macro Hard Industries?" Min asked, furrowing her brows. "I couldn't find an answer on the website." Ravi grimaced and nodded. "Yeah, we get that a lot. From what I've been told, the owner liked the company Microsoft, so he wanted a play on that name. And I guess it makes sense since 3D printers deal with hardware and macro things rather than software and micro things. But Jay always says we're named Macro Hard because the owner is trying to overcompensate for a small penis." Min blinked and nodded. "Oh, I see," she murmured. They had reached the double doors of the office. Ravi opened a door for Min to walk through. "Thanks," Min said, flashing a smile at him. Ravi nodded and continued walking alongside her towards the receptionist's desk. The office was an open setup without cubicles. Each desk was pushed together with computers and other office supplies lying on top of them. Min counted 4 people sitting at the 6 desks. The sound of whirring 3D printers echoed through the office. Min could see 2 rooms, which appeared to be full of various 3D printers. A break room and conference room sat on the left side wall. At the receptionist's desk, a thin blonde woman in her late 20s with sharp features sat in her chair, looking down at her desk in calm concentration. She wore a lime green sweater. As Min stopped next to the receptionist's desk, she noticed that in the blonde woman's hands were knitting needles. From what Min could tell, the woman was crocheting a peculiar miniature sweater out of black-colored yarn. "This is Amy Stake, our receptionist," Ravi said, gesturing from Min to the thin blonde woman. "Amy, this is Min. Wait here, I'll get Greg for you." "Okay, sounds good," Min said, nodding. Ravi walked away around the desks towards the glass office at the back of the room. Min looked at Amy. "What are you knitting?" Min asked. Amy smiled. "Oh, I'm knitting a costume for one of my cats." "Oh, that's cute," Min said, smiling at her. "Thanks," Amy said, her eyes alight. "What sort of costume is it?" Min asked. "It's a costume from a movie. Can you guess which one?" Amy asked. "Oh, Min furrowed her brows in concentration. "Some sort of superhero?" she asked, shrugging. Amy's excitement drained from her face. No, he's V from V for Vendetta. He's the social justice-fighting, government-hating vigilante. Oh, cool. Okay, Min said, nodding politely. She narrowed her eyes in confusion. Wait, doesn't that make him kind of a superhero? Amy's brows furrowed. What? No, a true hero doesn't need superpowers. All she or he needs is a strong conviction and a will to help the people. Oh, right, yeah, Min said, nodding. I mean, you've seen the movie, right? Amy asked, her eyes glinting in excitement. Min grimaced a frown. Oh, no. My mom never let me watch any movies that weren't educational. Amy furrowed her brows and frowned. Well, that's preposterous because this movie is educational. I mean, I really think they should force children in schools to experience it, along with 1984, of course. Min forced a smile and nodded. Cool, well, I'll have to look into it then, she said. Amy nodded. Yeah, let me know. I can lend you my copy. But how about you? Do you have any cats? Amy asked, gesturing to Min. Oh, no, Min said in a sad tone, grimacing. My mom says my room is dirty enough without pets. What? That's not right, Amy said, furrowing her brows. As a citizen of this country, you should be entitled to as dirty a room as you want. Well, when you live in a Korean mom's house, it's non-negotiable, Min said, grimacing. Just then, a door opened and a man emerged from the office. Min recognized the man. He was Greg Hayter, the manager of the office. Greg was a slim figure with black, thick-framed, rectangular glasses and a bald head. He had a radiant, happy smile as he approached Min, wearing a white, long-sleeved dress shirt and professionally adorned with a tie, slacks, and loafers. Hi, Min. Welcome aboard Macro Hard Industries, Greg said enthusiastically. We're actually just about to have a short meeting, but before that, why don't we introduce you to everyone? Then maybe Ravi can give you a tour of the office. Okay, Min said with a tremulous smile. They walked over to the congregation of desks at the center of the room. A handsome 6-foot-tall man sat slouched in his chair, dressed in a suit and tie. His feet were propped up on his desk as he nonchalantly tapped away at the cell phone in his hands. He had a squarish, handsome jaw and tidy, short hair. Across from him sat an older man who looked about 60 with balding, graying hair. This older man had a slight belly and wore large-framed glasses. Sitting next to the tall, handsome man was a young, nerdy-looking, skinny black man. Like Ravi, he still looked young enough to be in high school. His dress shirt appeared a size too large as it crinkled in a baggy mess at his sleeves and where it tucked into his pants. He wore black, rectangular framed glasses. The young, skinny man nervously pursed his lips as he sneaked a quick glance at Min. Let's start with Jay, one of our chief salesmen, Greg said, gesturing to the handsome, tall man. Okay, Min said, nodding. They walked over to him. Working hard, are we? Greg asked, his eyes narrowing, an amused look on his face. Jay looked up and smirked. You know it. I'm about to win a 3-way argument on Twitter about the best malt whiskey. I'm even citing my sources. Greg smiled at Min. He's always on his phone, the handsome little rascal. Jay shot an angry glare at Greg. Please don't call me a handsome little rascal, Greg chuckled. Oh, all right. You know I just like to have a little fun. Jay glared at Greg and then looked to Min, his expression softening into a smile. Just so you know, a little fun from him means a lot of stupidity for us. Greg shot him a displeased look. Yes, well, anyways, Min, meet Jay, one of our chief salesmen, Greg said, his voice now less than enthused. Hey, Jay said with a handsome grin, shaking Min's hand. Nice to meet you, Min said, her cheeks tinging pink. She flashed a small, nervous smile at him. Greg gestured to the old man at the table next to Jay. And this is Cliff Byfield, our other elder salesman and engineer. If you ever have a question, he knows a lot about how this office runs, as he does have the most seniority. I've been here since the beginning, Cliff said proudly, puffing out his chest. Yeah, the beginning of time, Jay said, a smirk on his lips. Cliff narrowed his eyes at Jay, shooting him an angry glance. The young, skinny black man laughed. Nice, he said, giving Jay a fist bump. Well, nice to meet you, Cliff, Min said, flashing a smile and shaking Cliff's hand. Cliff nodded distractedly as he still stared daggers at Jay and the young, skinny man. Greg walked further along and motioned to the young, skinny man sitting in the desk next to Jay. This is Lee. He's in charge of our printer machine maintenance and operations. Lee looked at Min, his eyes wide. He blinked 3 times rapidly, his body stiff. Hi, nice to meet you, Min said, smiling at him. Lee cleared his throat. Yes, nice to meet meet you. Sorry, he said quickly, his voice nervous. Min reached to shake his right hand, but Lee stuck out his left hand, keeping his right hand frozen on his computer mouse. Oh, Min said, awkwardly twisting her arm and shaking his left hand with her right. Lee cringed at the awkwardness of the handshake. His hand was cold and sweaty. Lee cleared his throat. Sorry my swan's all heady, he said, his eyes widening in horror. Sorry my hands are all sweaty. He winced and glanced away. Sorry, I get nervous meeting new people. He cringed again. Oh, no worries, Min said with a kind smile. I do too. Cliff shook his head. Don't worry, Min. He's just a virgin who doesn't know how to talk to women, he said. Lee's eyes widened at Cliff. Hey, he burst, offended. Well, it's true, Cliff said, shrugging. Well, I have a girlfriend, Lee said, crossing his arms emphatically. Cliff shrugged. Doesn't mean you're not a virgin. You have a girlfriend? Jay asked, his voice surprised and amused. Since when did that happen? And what's this girl's name? Ravi? Jay smirked. What? Lee said indignantly. Ravi and I are just good friends from college. No, my girlfriend's name is... He hesitated for a second. It's Giralda. Lee swallowed. Yeah, Giralda. Giralda? Jay stifled a laugh. Gee, sounds an awful lot like girl. Lee slumped his shoulders. She's an exchange student from Germany, he said, his voice quiet. Show me a picture of her sometime, Jay said, smirking and shaking his head. Okay, let's be nice now, Greg said, his tone serious. I'm sure Giralda is a nice young woman. Yeah, nice and imaginary, Jay said, chortling. Cliff smirked. Greg shook his head and continued walking to another desk where a petite Latina woman sat. She looked in her late 20s with short, jet-black hair, sharp brown eyes, and earrings in the shape of small oranges. A distinct orange starburst perfume wafted into Min's nostrils, which smelled nice. Greg gestured to the Latina woman. And finally, this is Maria Rico, our supplier relations and customer service representative, he said. Min nodded. On Maria's desk, Min noticed a picture of Maria with an older woman and another slimmer woman her age, dressed in a doctor's lab coat. Min assumed they were Maria's mother and sister. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Min, Min said, outstretching her hand towards Maria. Nice to meet you, Min, Maria answered with a beaming smile, her voice bubbly. She shook Min's hand and glanced at the silver pendant around her neck. Oh, your necklace is so pretty. What is it? Oh, thanks, Min beamed. It's a lotus flower. Oh, is that popular in Korean culture? Greg asked in curiosity. He winced at his words and held up his hands in innocence. Sorry, I hope that's not offensive. Oh, no, you're fine, Min said, shaking her head. She smiled and touched the necklace. Well, actually, it's more of a Buddhist symbol. Lotus flowers grow out of the mud and muck, and they signify a sort of symbolic effort to rise above and bloom. Greg's eyes widened, and he nodded in interest. Oh, very interesting. Well, we can't wait to watch you bloom. Here, though I won't say we're mud and muck, he said, breaking into forced laughter. Maria forced a small smile, and Min forced a chuckle. Greg cleared his throat. Anyways, Greg continued, his voice still upbeat, Maria here is our connection to the outside world. I imagine you two could make good friends. She's quite a good worker and a credit to the Latina community. She's how you say, un inteligente y bonita mierda, Greg said with a smile. Maria furrowed her brows at him. I'm an intelligent and beautiful shit? Greg cringed. Wait, I thought mierda was woman in Spanish. Maria grimaced and shook her head. It's mujer. Greg frowned. Are you sure? I heard my neighbors shouting the other night, and I swear the husband called his wife mierda. Maria frowned. They must not be such a happy couple, she said. Greg blinked. Oh, huh. Yeah, maybe you're right, he said, looking down in thought. He looked back up. Well, anyways, it was nice to meet you, Min, Maria said, beaming at Min. Min nodded and smiled back. Same to you, she said. Of course you already met Ravi, Greg said, gesturing to Ravi who sat beside Maria. Min and Ravi exchanged a smile and a wave. Greg continued. And we'll introduce you to our workers out in the finishing team later on, he said, motioning to the hallway that led to what appeared to be a large warehouse. Min nodded. Okay, sounds good. Greg gestured towards his office door. Let's have a little chat in my office then, he said. Min nodded. Okay, great, she said. A phone alarm chimed from Jay's desk. Ah, break time, Jay said, exhaling and yawning. Oh, finally, Cliff said, getting up from his chair and stretching his arms. Lee shook his head at Jay. Greg stopped by his office door in the middle of the room and narrowed his eyes at Jay. You need a break from your break? Greg asked, his hands on his hips. Jay shrugged. I'm waiting on a response from a client. There isn't anything else I can do at the moment. He got up from his chair and walked over to the break room with Cliff. Lee and Maria left their desks and followed them. Greg exhaled in annoyance and shook his head. He walked into his office, gesturing for Min to follow. Greg's office had walls of glass which looked out into the office floor. The blinds were drawn on the two sides. Greg sat down at his desk, and Min sat in the open chair across from him. Min gulped and spoke. Thank you for welcoming me to your office. It's very cozy, and I'm looking forward to getting started with you all, she said, flashing a nervous smile. Greg smiled and gestured to her. Well, we are so happy to have you working here. Your college transcripts were ever so impressive. I, for one, cannot wait to see how you will blossom with us here over the next few years. But as I said a few seconds ago, we'll just try to make sure we aren't the mud and muck holding you back, he said with a chuckle. Oh, abso-fruitly, Min said with a nervous smile. She gave a slight cringe at herself. Oh, God, that was so lame. Greg chuckled anyways. Click. The office door behind Min cracked open. Min and Greg both looked to the door. Amy poked her head in and spoke. Hey, Greg, Mr. Lead from Leeds Industries is on the line. He said it was urgent. Oh, okay, Greg said, smiling and nodding at Amy. He looked to Min and held up his finger. Min, bear with me for 1 second. They're our biggest customer. Min nodded and flashed him a smile. Greg picked up his desk phone's receiver and brought it to his ear. Well, hello, Mr. Lead. How are you on this beautiful Monday morning? He said brightly. He paused, listening to the response. Oh, no, bad news? That's not good, Greg said, his voice cutesy. There was a pause. Greg's face paled. You what? Greg's lower lip started trembling. Min furrowed her brows. Oh, God, oh, really? Oh, God, he whispered. Greg swiveled in his chair, hunching over and pressing the phone to his lips. No, please, don't do this, he said in a hush. We need you. We love you. Without you, there's nothing. Greg paused and gulped, his eyes bulging in fear. Min furrowed her brows in concern, her heart beating fast. Well, can we still stay friends, at least? Greg asked in a whisper, his face wincing in desperation. Hello? He slowly took the receiver away from his head and stared at it like it had just died. Oh, he hung up on me, Greg said, his face pale. He slowly sat up in his chair, now staring at his desk wide-eyed. Is everything okay? Min asked, her voice pitching higher in uncertainty. Greg gave a slow, half-scared laugh. Well, do you happen to have a spare $1 million sitting around or know anyone who needs 3D printing done? Min's eyes widened in fear. No. What just happened? She asked slowly, her heart skipping a beat. Oh God, what have I done? Greg said manically, grabbing his head in terror. What am I going to say to everyone? Is everything okay? Min asked again, her face pale with fright. Greg forcefully rubbed his hands down his cheeks, pulling his lower eyelids down. He cringed and looked to Min. How would you want to be told that everyone may have to take a 30% pay cut? What? Min asked, her eyelids fluttering in shock. Is this company going under? Min, you need to help me, Greg said desperately. Do I no longer have a job? Min asked. Greg bit his lip in frightful anticipation. Well, would you be cool being an unpaid intern? He asked, cringing in fear. What? Min exclaimed, her voice hurt. Greg flinched. He rose from his chair and placed his hands to his head as he began pacing the room. Oh God, I'm going to lose everyone's jobs, he said, his chest rising and falling. Everyone's going to say I'm the worst boss. They'll hate me. My mom was right. You're not special, Greg. Greg shook his head, looking down at the ground. Oh God, what do I do? What do I do? He whined in panic. Min blinked and opened her mouth to speak. No, don't answer that, Greg interrupted, waving a hand at her. I have to figure this out on my own. I have to be strong. He continued pacing the room frantically. But oh God, what am I going to say to corporate? Greg asked, his voice fearful. He put his hands on his head again. They'll say I'm a bad manager. They'll say I wasn't responsible enough to run the office. Oh God, what if I get everyone fired? What if... Suddenly, the door cracked open. Amy poked her head in. Greg and Min looked to her, their eyes wide. You've got David from corporate on line 1, Amy said. He says it's urgent. Min's heart pounded. She winced in worry. Greg's face paled. Oh my fucking God, Greg said with a stunned look. Okay, Min, give me the room. Min's brows furrowed as she looked back at Greg. But I don't even know where to... she started. Just give me the freaking room! Greg burst in panic, his voice cracking. He rushed over to the blinking phone set on his desk. Min shuddered, getting to her feet. Okay, she squeaked in a high pitch. Amy scrunched her nose and furrowed her brows at Greg. Geez, chill, Spazzy McGee, she said, her voice disgusted. She led Min out of the room and closed the door behind her. Sorry about him. Some people get so uptight sometimes, Amy said, shaking her head. She sighed and walked away towards the receptionist's desk. Min blinked at her, still reeling in shock. She made her way to the open desk across from Ravi and sat down in the chair, her eyes still wide. She dropped her bag to the ground beside her. Only Ravi sat at his desk as Lee, Maria, Jay, and Cliff were talking amongst themselves in the break room. Min stared at the black computer monitor in front of her, her chest rising and falling in panic. Suddenly, Ravi's face appeared above her desk's computer. Psst! Min! He whispered. Ah! Min yelped, flinching in surprise. What did he say to you? Ravi asked in a hushed voice. Min blinked for a moment, her mind in a tizzy. Well, I don't know. Something about losing a client and then me having to be an unpaid intern and... Min's voice trailed off as her throat clenched in emotion. What is my mom going to say about this? A panicked voice in her head asked. She'll say, I told you so. I told you you should have become a doctor or lawyer like Si-woo. Min's stomach felt like boiling lead. Ravi's eyes widened. Oh, God, Ravi said, looking down to the ground as if in a dramatic movie. What is it? Min asked, her eyes wide. I've been expecting this for some time. What do you mean? Min asked in a hush. We could be in the darkest timeline, Ravi said, staring at the ground in thought. Darkest timeline? Min asked nervously, her voice pitching high in confusion. Or perhaps in a dream within a dream, Ravi said, narrowing his eyes. Or in this case, a nightmare within a nightmare. Ravi reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a metallic tractrocoid top like the one used in the movie Inception. He held the top between his fingers and spun it on the table in front of them. What are you doing? Min whispered. This is an exact replica to the top used by Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie Inception, Ravi said. Min blinked. Oh, I haven't seen that movie. Ravi looked to her and furrowed his brows. Wow, seriously? Where have you been? Min grimaced and shrugged. Well, my mom wouldn't let me watch any movie above a G rating. Ravi frowned. Damn, that sucks. Min nodded and grimaced. Ravi blinked and continued. Okay, so the protagonist in the movie uses this as a totem to tell whether he is in reality or a dream, he said, pointing to the small metallic top. Oh, I see, Min said, nodding, her eyes still wide. I'm hoping maybe we're just all in a shared nightmare and we'll quickly wake up out of this, Ravi said. He looked back at the spinning top, staring at it intensely. Min gulped and nodded, watching the top spin on the desk, hoping he was right. Ravi crossed his fingers, winced, and held his breath. The top wobbled and tumbled to a stop on the desk. Ravi blinked. Crap, he said, staring at the tumbled top. Min cringed. I take it we're not in a dream, then? She asked. Ravi frowned and shook his head. Min hung her head and shut her eyes hard. I knew I had a bad feeling about today, she said, gesturing to Ravi. I should have known after those black cats crossed my path this morning. Ravi's ears perked. He stared at her again. Black cats? Say what now? Ravi asked intensely. Min furrowed her brows. Well, cats usually meow, not talk. Ravi shook his head. No, I mean, what did you see this morning? Min blinked. Oh, well, there was this black cat that ran past my car, and then a few seconds later, another one just like it, Min said, gesturing with her hands. It was a kind of a weird déjà vu, not to mention a real wake-up call. Ravi gasped. Min sighed and looked down at her table. Maybe it was just a sign of the impending bad luck to come. Min looked up at Ravi and frowned at his pale expression. What? She asked. A glitch in the Matrix, Ravi said, his voice hushed. A glitch in the what now? Min asked. How much like each other? He asked softly. Did the cats look exactly the same? Min furrowed her brows in confusion. Well, yeah, pretty similar. It was dark, though. I kind of just thought the cats could have been related, Min said with a shrug. Oh, no. Ravi set his eyes wide. A déjà vu. What? A déjà vu is usually a glitch in the Matrix. It happens when they change something. I'm sorry. Who's changing what? Min said, furrowing her brows. The machines, Ravi said in a hush. Right, Min said, narrowing her eyes and nodding slowly. This guy is kind of crazy, she thought to herself. Wait, what's this Matrix you're talking about? Is it like that Sudoku game? Min asked. Ravi furrowed his brows at her. I take it you haven't seen The Matrix either? He asked. Min's eyes furrowed. Well, I saw a Matrix in college. Multiple, actually. Oh, which ones? Min shrugged. Well, many different kinds. We used them in my math and engineering classes, she said. Ravi sighed in disappointment. Never mind, Min grimaced. At that moment, Greg's office door opened violently. Greg exited his office, his eyes shifting all around the room in paranoia. Okay, everyone. Hi, how are you? Greg asked, his voice cutesy and nervous. So, let's all gather together in the conference room. There's something that I have to tell y'all. Greg gave a nervous, high-pitched giggle. Ravi picked up his totem top from the desk and pocketed it. Jay walked back into the main office room and groaned, looking up from his phone. What now? He muttered. I was just about to beat my high score on Minesweeper, Cliff grumbled, pocketing his phone. Everyone made their way into the conference room. The conference room had a large wooden table and 10 plush swivel chairs stationed around it. 2 large whiteboards were hung on the far side wall alongside 2 large windows, which looked out into the parking lot. On the near side, the walls were windows which looked out into the main part of the office with a view of everyone's desks. Min took a seat towards the middle, setting her bag down underneath the table. Greg gulped, wringing his hands and pacing the front of the room as everyone took their seat. He gave a deep exhale and placed his hands on the table, leaning over it. Okay, so good news and bad news, he said, looking to everyone. He gulped. The good news is that everyone will be getting off a few hours early today. Oh, yay! Maria exclaimed, nodding in approval. Jay furrowed a brow in suspicion. What's the occasion for that? He asked. Greg winced. Well, it ties into the bad news, which is that our biggest client canceled all their orders and we may soon be out of business, Greg said, still wincing. Oh, no, Maria exclaimed, shaking her head in disbelief. Lee's eyes widened. What the hell? Jay asked, his eyes bulging. You're kidding me, Amy said, her face paling. Min shut her eyes, her head bowing. How the hell did this happen? Cliff asked. Are we losing our jobs? Maria asked. Are we still going to get paid? Lee asked. Greg winced. Well, yes, in theory you will be getting paid, he said. I can't promise anything, but if we can make the $1 million worth of sales we lost by the end of the month, then there will be nothing to worry about, he said, holding up his hands and wincing in a hopeful shrug. The end of the month? Jay demanded, lowering his brows further. Maria's eyes widened. That's today, she shouted. Oh my God, Amy exclaimed. How can this be happening? Min whispered, looking wide-eyed at the ground in shock. Are you kidding me? Lee asked, his face pale. Oh, just perfect. I knew I should have invested in those internet coins, Cliff said, his nostrils flaring. A commotion ensued as more angry questions were fired at Greg. Hey, 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 Ravi shouted, raising his hands. One at a time. Everyone quieted down, some blinking at him in surprise. Ravi looked to Greg, his expression serious. Do we all still have jobs? Ravi asked. Greg gulped. Well, that will be discussed between me and corporate, but what? Jay demanded, his temper rising. Greg cringed, afraid to hear the response. But we can all take a 30% pay cut, he said in a hopeful voice. The room burst into anger. Are you serious? Jay shouted. After all we've done for this company, Cliff said, glaring at Greg. Especially certain people. Maria's eyes widened in panic, her breath hyperventilating. Oh, God! I'm going to have to start looking for another job, she said, bringing her hand to her forehead. Yeah, me too, Cliff said. Oh, shut up, Cliff, Jay said, glaring at Cliff. We've all heard you're boasting about your Porsche and your country club membership. It's the rest of us I worry about. Cliff narrowed his eyes at Jay. Damn it, Lee said, glaring at Greg. My girlfriend's going to be pissed. He looked around at everyone to make sure everyone had heard. Panic rose in Min's chest as she bowed her head, staring at the table. My mom was right. This job was a terrible choice, said a sad voice in her head. Can't you call them back and negotiate? Maria asked hopefully. Greg grimaced and shook his head. Well, they said they've already switched printing suppliers and due to pricing differences, they won't be back. Oh, brilliant, Jay said sarcastically, rolling his eyes. Maria shook her head, looking to the ground in despair. I know I've let everyone down, Greg said, his eyes tearing up. I'm a terrible boss. I'm sorry. Greg bowed his head in defeat. Amy, can you loan me some lipstick? Cliff said. Amy looked up and furrowed her brows at him, her arms still crossed. What? Why? Because I want to look pretty while I'm getting fucked by this company. This is so unfair. Min began trembling, her thoughts swirling in a rising vicious anger as she ran her fingers through her hair. I'm so screwed. My mom is going to disown me. She's going to say that I'm a failure. She pulled at her hair, her hands trembling. Her mother's words rang through her head. Siwoo's Amma told me at Temple that he already makes $200,000 as a lawyer, and he's a full 2 years younger than you. Min's breath constricted. Just be perfect. Min massaged her forehead, her chest rising and falling fast. You always must be prepared, Minji. Why weren't you prepared for this? Min closed her eyes and shook her head, trying to block out her mother's voice. You have a pimple on your forehead. Cover it up. Min winced, shutting her eyes harder. Why couldn't you just have been perfect like Siwoo? The pressure had to be released. Min raised her head, her chest rising and falling. Ah! Min screamed, her eyes wincing closed and her fists clenching. The room fell silent. Min opened her eyes. Everyone stared at her, their eyes wide and expressions taken aback. "So I no longer have a job?" Min shouted. "How could you screw me like this?" Min looked around the room and then settled her glare at Greg. Greg flinched. "You said I would be working here for years. You said I would blossom here, but no! Now I have to go home empty-handed where my mom will call me a failure. She'll probably drop me off at Skid Row and adopt that stupid Si-Woo kid who she practically adores." Min's chest rose and fell, her eyes wide. She blinked and looked around the room at the shocked faces looking at her. Her face paled and she clapped her trembling hand to her mouth in horror. "Sheesh," Cliff said, raising a brow. "New girl has some anger issues." Min let down her shaking hand and looked around the room. "I'm sorry," Min said in a quiet voice with sincerity. It seems I have a lot of pent-up frustration," she said, her face blushing beet red. I sometimes snap when something messes up my plans." Min paused, pursing her lips and clenching her eyes shut. "Look, I understand. I'm the least senior person here." Min grimaced, opening her eyes and wincing in shame and embarrassment. "I'll just go." Greg looked at her, his brows raised in sadness and shock, his eyes watered with tears. Min got up and grabbed her bag, wiping a tear from her eyes. "Wait," Jay said, raising his hand. Min paused and looked back at Jay. So did everyone else in the room. Jay stood. "We can still save your job," he said, looking at Min, a soft, empathetic expression on his face. Min furrowed her brows. Jay looked around at everyone. "We can still save all of our jobs and still be paid our due worth. And this isn't Greg's fault," Jay said, pointing to him. "This job is a great place because of him. We can slack off. We have great parties. We have fun together. And we all like each other. Well, somewhat," Jay said, his gaze stopping at Cliff. "Pretty gay, dude," Cliff said, not impressed. Jay grimaced and nodded. "Great, thanks, Cliff," he said, before pausing and looking around at the room again. "But before we give up on Greg, we owe it to him and ourselves to try and find a new client, because we probably won't find a job or boss as great as this one ever again." Jay paused and then shrugged. "And, plus, we can just apply for new jobs after work hours." There were a few shrugs and nods. Jay held up his hands, gesturing to those around him. "Look, the point is this. If we're going down today, then we're going down together, as a team. Oldest and newest members among us," Jay said, looking at Min. He gave her a reassuring nod. Min flashed a tiny, grateful smile back at him. "So let's combine our brainpower and unfuck this shit together," he said, pounding the conference table emphatically. Everyone smiled and began nodding. "It'd be a good speech, lad," Ravi said, nodding. "Hear, hear," Maria said. Jay smiled and nodded at Ravi and Maria in thanks. Greg's eyes were filled with tears. "Thank you," he mouthed to Jay. Jay gave him a grimace and a nod. Amy crossed her arms, her brows furrowed in skepticism. "All right, I'm all for kumbaya and everything, but how are we going to make up for that lost client?" she asked. Lee frowned. "Well, we are a 3D printer company. Is it possible to print Bitcoin?" Lee asked, shrugging. "Like out of little bits of plastic?" Jay narrowed his eyes at Lee. "You do know Bitcoin isn't a physical currency, right?" "Well, maybe we could make it physical," Lee said, gesturing to him. Jay shook his head, stifling a chuckle. He looked over to Greg. "Greg," Jay said with a smile, gesturing to Greg, "you're our fearless leader. What do you think?" Greg smiled in thanks. He puffed up his chest and narrowed his eyes, nodding in renewed composure. "Well, let's try and schedule a meeting with a new potential client. I do have a contact with the company, Aerodynamics, who I can call. They said they'd be open to meeting with us." "That sounds promising," Jay said, raising his brows in interest. Greg smiled and nodded. "Yes, they're a global aerospace company, so if we could get any of their business, it could really help make up for what we lost." Jay nodded. All right, so how should we attack this? Well, I'd want my 2 best sales leads on it to meet with them, Greg said, looking to Jay and Cliff. Jay and Cliff shot irritated glances at each other. Greg continued. And Ravi, since you are an expert in our production volume and machines we have, I'd want you to go along with them, too. Ravi nodded. Sure, sounds good, he said. Greg looked to Min. Min, I think it'd be a good experience for you to accompany them, he said. No, okay, Min said, flashing a nervous smile. Don't worry, Min. You're in good hands with me, Cliff said with a smile, patting Min's shoulder. Yeah, if you want his creepy hands touching you, Jay retorted. Cliff raised his hands in a shrug. What did I say that was creepy? Just fawning over a girl young enough to be your granddaughter. Oh, please, I'm only 61. Greg narrowed his eyes at Jay and Cliff. Okay, is this going to be a problem, you two working together? Greg asked. Yes, Jay and Cliff chorused back, their voices irritated. Just let one of us go while the other stays behind, Jay said. Greg raised his brows. Jay, I thought you were just telling us that we were all in this together, like a certain well-made Disney movie called High School Musical, he said, placing his hands on his hips. Well, I did stipulate that we somewhat all like each other, Jay said. And I did call him gay, Cliff said, holding up a finger. Jay rolled his eyes. Shut up, Cliff. And Greg, I definitely did not reference High School Musical. It is not Oscar-worthy as much as you want it to be. Greg sneered at Jay. Okay, you guys need to work this out between you two, he said in a more severe tone, pointing to Jay and Cliff. Well, we don't need to. We could just stay separated, Jay said, shrugging. Cliff nodded. Greg shook his head. No, come on, Greg said, his tone now becoming like an irritated lecturing mother. Jay, you are an expert in our newer printer technologies with metals, and Cliff, you are an expert in plastics and all the older printing technologies. I need you both there because this potential client could have the need for either or both of these products. So I want you two to bury the hatchet on this petty feud right now and swear that you'll cooperate. Jay sighed. He grimaced and looked to Cliff. Fine, he grumbled. Let's just work together today and then we don't have to talk about it again. He held out his hand to shake Cliff's. Cliff stared at Jay, his nostrils flared. Absolutely. Not? Jay threw up his hands and looked to the ceiling in disbelief. Oh, okay, Cliff. What exactly is the problem? Greg asked, his hands on his hips. Cliff snarled at Jay. You've heard him criticizing me all the time, intimidated by my intelligence and sex appeal. Jay chuckled and rolled his eyes. Greg sighed. All right, Jay. Could you promise Cliff for today that you will not make fun of him or talk back to him in any way? He asked. Jay grimaced and nodded, giving a sharp exhale through his nose. Fine, you have my word, Cliff. I won't say anything degrading or critical to you. All right. Cliff, we happy? Greg asked, gesturing to him. Cliff gave an irritated grumble and stiff shrug. Fine, whatever, he grumbled. There you see, we can all get along after all, Greg said with a smile. So what are the rest of us supposed to do? Amy asked, her eyes narrowed. Greg looked to Amy and frowned. TBD, he said slowly. Is TBD some sort of drug? Lee asked, his brows raising. You're thinking of CBD, Ravi chimed in. It's found in cannabis. Amy perked up in interest. Oh, I have some in my car if anyone's interested. Jay furrowed his brows at her. Amy winced. Some CBD. I mean, not cannabis. It's for my cat, Fluffy. He suffers from arthritis, Amy said, clearing her throat quickly. No. The TBD will be something we figure out, Greg said. Business as usual. Everyone grimaced and nodded. Greg smiled. All right then, everyone. Let's get to work. We have a company to save, Greg said, smacking the table with enthusiasm. Ravi gave a small, clenched fist pump. Everyone flashed weak smiles. Cliff gave a low, muttering groan. And there was much rejoicing, Ravi said quietly. Oh, okay, I was expecting a little more enthusiasm there, But that's okay, we'll work on it, Greg said, holding up his hands. Jay hung up his desk phone and got up and walked over to everyone still in the conference room. Okay, so I just spoke with their head of product development, Sophie, and we now have a meeting today at 11 o'clock. He checked his watch. So, in about an hour. Okay, great, Greg said enthusiastically. Jay nodded. Yeah, we'd better get this show on the road. Jay, Cliff, Min, and Ravi grabbed their bags from beneath their desks. Min walked over to Jay's desk, wringing her hands in nervousness. Should I bring anything else? Min asked, her hands starting to sweat. Don't worry, everything we need is always right here, Jay said, pointing to his head and smiling. And also right here, he said, pointing to his charming smile. Min blinked and anxiously looked to Jay's desk. Okay, but do we have all the binders and everything? What if they ask about something really obscure? Jay shook his head. We've got everything we need. What about that handbook on your desk? Min asked, pointing to a stray pamphlet. Jay glanced at it and shrugged. Oh yeah, that's just an extra copy. I should have one in my bag. Plus, no one ever asks about those materials. They're very obscure. Well, maybe you should double-check to make sure. What if this is the time someone... Jay held up his hand. We've got everything we need, Min, he said, brushing her off with a smile. All we've got to do now is just come in cool and calm and charm their socks off. Oh, are they an Asian company? What? Like they don't want us to wear shoes or socks while inside, Min asked. Jay blinked. No. No socks or shoes will literally be removed in this meeting. It was just a figure of speech. Oh, okay, Min said, nodding and grimacing. But what if... Jay held up a hand. Hakuna Matata, Min. Hakuna Matata. Min's eyes lit up. Oh, it means no worries, right? Jay smiled and nodded. Yep, for the rest of your days, he said. Or at least until you think of another worry. Which seems easy enough for you. Min ignored him, smiling at herself. I actually understood a reference for once, she said happily. Jay looked to Ravi and Cliff, who were packing their satchel bags. Separate cars, then? Jay asked Cliff. I think that goes without saying, Cliff said as if it was obvious, narrowing his eyes at him. Who's going with who? Ravi asked. Well, you can come in the cool car with me or the gay car with Jay, Cliff said, shouldering his bag. Jay stared at Cliff. Very classy insult, Cliff, he said sarcastically. Come on, Ravi, let's go, Cliff said, walking out of the room. All right, Ravi said, nodding. I should have told Greg to make him not insult me, Jay muttered to Min. Min gave a flickering, uncomfortable smile. Jay looked to Min. And for the record, I am not gay. And there's nothing gay about my car, whatever that means, he said. Min nodded. As you've no doubt noticed, Cliff is rather out of touch and offensive, Jay continued. This is a pretty average day for him. Right, Min said, nodding again. Min and Jay walked out the office door and across the parking lot to Jay's car. My car's over here, Jay said, pointing to a shiny black 2006 BMW 325i. Okay, Min said with a nod. Jay grimaced as he opened the driver's side door. He looked back at Min. I know it's only a 2006 model, but it's still got climate control, seat warmers, and surprisingly, Bluetooth. I'm currently investing my savings so that I can retire as soon as possible, he said. Min nodded. They both got into the car and strapped their seatbelts on. Jay gestured as he continued speaking. Just wait until you hear Cliff brag about his Porsche Cayenne. I don't know even why he got that model. It's a 4-door SUV. I mean, if you're going to get a Porsche, why not get the 718 or 911 turbo? Is he trying to look like a gold-digging soccer mom or something? Min grimaced and shrugged. Jay exhaled. God, that guy is such an idiot. He took out his phone and began typing in the address onto Google Maps. Something moved in Min's side mirror. Min narrowed her eyes and looked out her window. One of the black cats she had encountered earlier that morning was walking towards the car. The cat stopped at a car next to theirs and began sniffing one of the tires. Then, 2 more black cats emerged from the bushes. They bounded forwards and stopped beside the first cat. Min frowned. "Oh no, it's those black cats again," she said. "I hope that's not another bad sign." Jay turned to look. He scoffed. "Ah, we make our own luck," Jay said. "Come on." He turned the keys in the ignition and the car's engine roared to life. As Jay turned onto the highway, Min pursed her lips and played with her fingers, her palms sweating. Jay took notice. "You all right there, Min?" he asked. Min looked to him and flashed a nervous smile. "Oh, just a little nervous. No biggie," she said. "Nervous? What are you nervous about?" Jay asked, furrowing his brows. Min gulped. "Oh, well, it's just that I don't do well in public speaking and presentations without preparing." Jay frowned. "Well, you interviewed for this job, didn't you? It'll be sort of like that at the very worst," Jay said with a nonchalant shrug. "Yeah, but for that interview, I prepped with 300 flashcards of potential questions," Min said, her voice tense. "If I don't feel prepared, I start getting nervous. And when I get nervous, I start sweating. And when I start sweating, I get self-conscious. And when I get self-conscious, I panic and get lightheaded," Min said, fanning her face with her hand. "At my valedictorian speech in high school, I fainted and fell off the stage into the orchestra pit. I had to spend the next month in the hospital recovering from it." Jay raised his brows, blinking in shock. "Wow," he said. Min nodded and continued, her breathing quick. "I purposely got A-minuses in my last semester in college to avoid making another speech. My mom was so ashamed." Jay blinked, his eyes wide. "I see," he said. "Holy crap, this girl is kind of psycho," he thought to himself. "What about when you started yelling at Greg, though?" Jay asked Min. "You seemed fine there." Min winced at the memory of that incident. "Well, I guess when I'm angry, the words just flow." Jay nodded for a moment, then cocked his head and gave a small chuckle. "I guess you're kind of like the Hulk of public speaking, then. Maybe I should just provoke you while we're in our meeting," he said, grinning. Min grimaced, looking down to her feet. Jay looked over at Min, expecting a laugh. He noticed her insecurity and grimaced in guilt. "Sorry, I've just never struggled with talking in front of people," Jay said. Min frowned for a moment and then looked to him. "Well, what do you think about to be so calm and collected, then?" Min asked. Jay thought for a moment, furrowing his brows. "It's so simple," he thought. "Nothing," he said with a little shake of his head. Min sighed. "Well, what makes you so good at talking in front of people? There must be some tip or advice you can give me." Jay blinked. "Well, I don't know, just remember to breathe and then trust your gut," he said, his voice pitching higher in concern. Min gulped and nodded. "Okay, breathe and trust my gut." Min nodded, pursing her lips in concentration. Okay, I think I can do that." She winced. "But what if my gut idea results in a mistake?" Jay blinked, shaking his head, his own heart now beating faster in worry. Do some people really not find this simple? Oh man, thinking about this is making me anxious, he thought to himself. "You'll be fine," he said, his voice more tense. "Just don't overthink it and trust yourself that you can figure it out." Min grimaced and exhaled. "Okay," she said. "I'll try." Jay smiled and shook his head. "Do or do not, Min," he said. "Don't just try." "Don't just try?" Min asked, her voice pitching high in concern. "What?" Jay frowned. "Oh, whoops, you're right. I misquoted. It's do or do not. There is no try." Min blinked. "Wait, what am I not doing? Am I not trying hard enough?" she said, her voice pitching in worry, her eyes wide. Jay furrowed his brows at her. "What?" "No, it's a quote. From Yoda," he said, gesturing as if it was obvious. Min stared at him blankly. "Who?" Jay shot her an incredulous look. "Oh, you're kidding. You haven't seen Star Wars?" he asked. Min grimaced and shook her head. "My mom said fantasies and science fiction are a waste of time. She told me to focus on studying reality and science fact." "What?" Jay sputtered. Min shrugged. "My mom believed watching movies wouldn't help me get a good job. Only studying." and sometimes reading, as long as it was relevant to the studying. Jay blinked and shook his head. Jesus. Did your mom let you have any fun? I mean, did you do anything else besides studying? Well, I did play piano, Min said, shrugging, though my mom said I should only call it practicing piano, not playing. She says playing and having fun will give me bad habits and make me less successful. And if I'm not getting better, then I'm becoming more of a failure. Jay blinked again. Well, okay then, he said. Chapter 2. Amy sat in a chair next to Maria and Lee, whom sat at their respective desks. Maria bit her lip nervously, looking at Greg's office. The office door opened, and Greg exited, a stern look on his face. Well, what did corporate say? Maria asked, her eyes wide in anticipation. Greg grimaced and sighed. Well, David said if we don't make enough orders by today, he will want me to start letting people go. Lee's brows raised, the color leaving his cheeks. How many people? He asked, his voice fearful. Greg grimaced. Well, a few, he said slowly. Lee and Maria's eyes widened. Oh my God, they chorused together. Amy shook her head. A few people? Can't you just tell corporate to go to hell? She asked. Greg held up his hand, palm facing her. He shook his head, his expression serious and composed. At this point, there is nothing more I can do on that front. So we're going to have to dig deep, metaphorically speaking, and try to make lemons out of lemonade. Lee furrowed his brows. I think you've got that backwards. What? Greg asked. You can't unsqueeze lemonade back into lemons. Greg glared at Lee. Well, maybe I have a time machine. The point is we have to figure this shit out, Greg said, the veins in his neck popping. He closed his eyes and sighed, holding up his hands apologetically. Sorry, when I get really anxious, sometimes I start swearing. Maria grimaced. Well, actually, you could grow a new lemon tree from planting the lemon seeds caught by the squeezer thing, she said with a shrug. Lee frowned and nodded. Oh, good point, Greg said, nodding. So, continuing with that analogy, what we need to do is to plant our seed in some new clients and then come back later to harvest the rewards of our new business with them. Maria's lips parted. Wow. There were so many things wrong with that sentence, she said, shaking her head. Lee raised his brows. Wait, are we getting our clients pregnant? Greg blinked in confusion. Amy cringed, her eyes widening. But if we fail, how are you going to decide who to let go? Amy asked, her voice fearful. I have 5 cats to take care of at home. Fluffy has cataracts in her eyes. Greg held up a hand, his expression unfazed. We're not going to worry about that right now because we have to focus. There is a good chance that when we get the new business today that it won't be enough, so we need to come up with other ways to make money. I have a few ideas. Amy shrugged, frowning. So what? Are we going to flaunt our jugs for OnlyFans? She asked, looking down at the table. Maria scoffed. Jugs? I don't understand. Who would pay for those? Greg said, furrowing his brows in confusion. A lot of teenagers, probably, Amy said darkly. Greg frowned. What would teenagers want with 3D printed water jugs? Are the ones sold at Target not good enough? He asked. Amy cocked her head at him and narrowed her eyes. Greg blinked and narrowed his own eyes. And wait, why would we sell jugs to OnlyFans? He said, using air quotes. I'd make sure anyone who would want to buy our jugs could come and see them on our website. Maria furrowed her brows. Do you not know jugs is code for boobs? She asked. Greg furrowed his brows. Wait, it is? Everyone smirked, containing their laughter. I mean, of course, Greg said, clearing his throat. I knew that. That was just a test, and you all passed. Look, we're going to have to take on more individual clients, not just our fans. Amy sighed. Oh, God, we tried this before, didn't we? Amy said, shaking her head. Half of these people are perverts wanting us to make them fake silicone penises. Must we submit to the cruelties of capitalism and exploit our sexuality for money? Well, if penises is what our clients want, then penises is what they'll get, Greg said confidently. I mean, as long as they pay for it. So, we're kind of like whoring out our business then? Lee asked, raising a brow. Well, Greg paused, a slight frown on his face. We're just making penises, Lee. We're not... He paused again, cringing a grimace. Okay, yeah, we kind of are, but we have to respect people's wants and needs. These are the metaphorical holes that people need filled. Economics 101, right? Greg said, gesturing to them. Lee and Maria shrugged and nodded. Amy crossed her arms. Greg nodded and continued. So, if people's holes need to be filled by fake printed penises, then so be it. We will stuff them full. Amy shot him a disgusted grimace. Greg frowned. No, that's not... Greg held up his hand. Look, we're just going to respect people's wants and needs and sell to them, if they give us their consent. Greg cleared his throat and refocused. Okay, look. I have the list of clients who have contacted us in the past, and here is the list of people awaiting their penises. I mean, prints. Greg shook his head. Sorry, Freudian penis, he said, holding up his hand. His eyes widened. I mean, Freudian slip. Everyone smirked at Greg, holding in their laughter. Oh, shut up, Greg said, his ears burning red. He exhaled. Okay, Maria, I want you to start contacting everyone on the list, Lee as well. Ugh, Maria groaned. Lee's eyes widened. As in call them? Lee asked. Yes, Greg answered. Actually, you know what? I think I hear a machine beeping. I should check the printing room. Greg furrowed his brows. I don't hear any beeping, Lee, he said, confused. Oh, really? Lee said quickly in a higher-pitched voice. That's odd. Maybe you just can't hear at that frequency since you're all so old, he said, clearing his throat. Anyways, I better go since checking the machines is my job. He jogged away into the printing room. Okay, but you'll have to come back here eventually, Greg called after him. At least he has an excuse, Maria said, shaking her head. Greg frowned and turned to Amy. Amy, I'm also going to enlist your help in this. Enlist me? As a free citizen of this country, I don't have to obey you, Amy said defiantly, crossing her arms. Well, then you don't have to have a job, Greg said, his hands on his hips. Amy grimaced and sighed. Okay, bluff called, she said reluctantly. Greg nodded. Take Jay's desk, he said, pointing to the empty desk. Lee will come back and help you out with the design program. I'll take Cliff's desk. Fine, Amy grumbled. Maria picked up her phone and started dialing. Greg walked to the printing room. Lee, come on back. We need your help, he called. Chapter 3. Jay continued driving himself and Min towards the business meeting. Min glanced at Jay's phone, which was suspended above the dash, displaying the navigation to the meeting. She could see that they were about 20 minutes away from their destination. Ka-clunk, 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 ka-clunk. Oh, crap, Jay said, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. What is it? Min asked, her eyes widening. Jay checked his fuel gauge. The dial was down to empty, and the low fuel light dimly glowed amber. Jay grimaced. Damn it, we're out of gas. What? Why didn't you check before we left? Min asked, preening her skirt and breathing faster. Jay grimaced at her in guilt. I only noticed the little amber low fuel light at night. It's just so dim. Min narrowed her eyes at him. Dim like your mind? Min wanted to retort. She glared at him, not impressed. Good excuse, she said, her voice annoyed. Min shook her head in frustration and glanced at the car's clock. 10:30, the clock read. Min gulped, her eyes widening. Oh, God, it's already 10:30. We've only got 30 minutes to get there. It's all right. We've got time, Jay said. Min began breathing faster in a panic. She gripped the nearby armrest, started shaking her head, staring down at the car's dashboard. Oh, God. Now we're going to be late, and they're going to judge us as disrespectful, and then they'll look at us with disapproval. and then they won't take us seriously, and then they won't like us, and then we'll be alone without any friends and any job, and then our parents will disown us and tell us we're a disappointment and an embarrassment to humanity." Min frantically fanned herself with her hands, her breath wheezing fast. "Wow," Jay said, his eyes widening at her reaction. "That is very specific." He held out his hand in a calming gesture. "Look, it's gonna be all right. I'll just call Ravi and he'll bring Cliff's car. Then we'll all get there on time and everything will work out great, okay?" "How do you know that everything will be great?" Min asked, her eyes bulging. "Do you have ESP or some sort of crystal ball?" Jay blinked for a moment. "Well, no, but I mean I have good instincts and charisma to compensate," Jay said, giving her a smirk and wink. Min stared back at him, her expression still taut with stress. Jay grimaced at Min's look of continued anxiety. "Look, we'll be fine," he said. "The company is only 15 minutes away, and we're still 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Just try taking a few deep breaths." Min blinked and nodded. "Okay, a few deep breaths," Min repeated, staring back at the car dash. She inhaled rushed short breaths, still hyperventilating. Jay pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. He tapped on his phone to call Ravi. Min continued huffing in a hyperventilating breath. Jay glanced over, frowning. "Take deeper breaths than that," he said to her as his phone began to ring. Min looked at him, her eyes wide. Jay lifted the phone to his ear. "What's up, Jay?" Ravi answered. "Hey, Ravi, we're going to need you to pick us up," Jay said. He paused to hear Ravi's response. "Yeah, my car broke down just before the 101 exit." Min furrowed her brows at Jay, wondering why he said the car broke down when it was clearly his fault the car ran out of gas. Jay covered the phone and whispered to Min, "Don't want Cliff to think it was me who made the mistake." Min blinked and gave a nod. She resumed wheezing short, quick breaths while preening her skirt. Jay listened to Ravi's response and began nodding. "Okay, thanks, Ravi. We'll see you in a bit," Jay said. He tapped his phone to end the call. Jay glanced over to Min and frowned at her continuing hyperventilation. He lifted up his center console storage compartment, found a folded brown paper bag, and handed it to Min. "Try breathing into this," he said. Min looked to Jay and furrowed her brows. "How's this going to help?" she asked. "It'll give you more carbon dioxide to stop your hyperventilation." "I thought I needed more oxygen." Jay grimaced and shook his head. "No, less is more for you, in just about every case," he said. Min blinked, processing his words. "Right," she said. She unfolded the paper bag and began breathing into it. The bag contracted and expanded on every inhale and exhale. Min's breath started to slow. 10 minutes passed. Buzz, buzz. Jay's phone vibrated in his hand, and a text alert filled his phone's screen. Jay looked up from his phone at Min. "Okay, they're here," he said, as a shiny, black, mid-sized SUV pulled up behind them. Min put down her paper bag and put it in her pocket. She and Jay got out of the car carrying their satchel and bag. Cliff rolled down his window as he stopped the car. Ravi got out and walked over to them. Cliff grinned at Jay, his eyes glinting. "Well, well, well, look who it is," he said, chuckling in pleasure. "A broken-down car for a broken-down man." Jay rolled his eyes. "Okay, Cliff, you're hilarious. Let's just go." Jay locked his car and walked towards Cliff's car. "I guess it's a good thing I didn't get the two-seater after all, seeing as you're the one needing my extra seats," Cliff said, smiling and shaking his head at Jay. Jay ignored him. "What's wrong with the car?" Ravi asked. Jay glanced back at Ravi. "Oh, it was making a clunking noise. I'll get it figured out later," Jay said with a shrug. He opened Cliff's car door. Ravi shrugged. "Well, I used to help my dad as a mechanic, so maybe I can fix—" Jay waved him off. "Oh, no, I already checked. It has to do with the, spark crank," he said, giving a grimace. Ravi frowned. "There's no such thing as a spark crack." "It's unfixable, Ravi." "Let's just go," Jay whispered harshly, irking his head towards the car. Ravi shrugged. Okay, he said. Min and Jay got into the back seat of Cliff's car. After everyone buckled their seatbelts, Cliff drove off. Min began preening her skirt again. She gulped. Cliff glanced into his rearview mirror. You nervous, Min? He asked. Min cleared her throat. Yeah, a little, Min said, her voice quiet. Cliff made a poo-pooing gesture. Don't worry. Just picture everyone naked. That's what I always do, Cliff said. Nice. Really perverted, Jay said, shaking his head. Oh, come on, Cliff said, his voice pitching in innocence. It's a helpful strategy. After 20 minutes of driving, they had arrived at the office. Min checked her phone. The clock read 11:46. They were 1 minute late. Min's palms began sweating. Her fingers and toes went ice cold. Cliff pulled their car into one of the business park's parking lot spaces and turned off the engine. The office building was sleek and modern, 2 stories high and with large black glass windows. I think it goes without saying that as the person with the most experience and charm, I'll be taking the lead, Cliff said, unbuckling his seatbelt. Sure. Fine, Cliff, Jay said, rolling his eyes as he opened the car door beside him. Min followed Jay out of the car. Cliff shut his door and paused for a moment, inhaling and taking in the surroundings. A slight smile curled his lips. All right, Cliff said, putting on a pair of aviator sunglasses. Let's do this! Ravi nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of 1990s Matrix-style sunglasses. More like, let's get paid, he said, putting on the sunglasses. Or let's get laid, Cliff said, chuckling to himself. Jay looked at them and sighed, shaking his head. God, you guys are so lame. Min's heart skipped a beat, her eyes wide. Should I have brought sunglasses? She asked. Only if you want to look cool, Cliff answered. Jay rolled his eyes. You're fine, Min, come on, Jay said, shaking his head. They got out of the car and they all began walking towards the 2-story building. Whoa. Hello, Jay said under his breath. A voluptuous, pretty black woman in her mid-30s emerged from the building looking down at a cell phone in her hand. She had dark brown shoulder-length hair and wore a pantsuit with a purple V-neck blouse. That must be Sophie, Ravi said, as they continued walking closer. Cliff looked back at them and smirked. She's got a fine pair of breasts, doesn't she? He muttered. Oh, God, please don't, Jay muttered back. As they all approached Sophie, she looked up from her phone and smiled at them. Hello, everyone. I'm Sophie. Welcome to Aerodynamics, Sophie said, her voice upbeat. Wow, lots of people here today, I see. Cliff chuckled, holding out his hand to shake hers. Yeah, and I've got every race represented with me, he said, shaking Sophie's hand. It's so lovely to meet you. I'm Cliff Byfield, quarter black, 3/4 white, but one fully proud American like yourself. Sophie lowered a brow as she shook his hand tentatively. Jay furrowed his brows, chuckling nervously. He turned to Cliff. You are not a quarter black, he said, his voice irritated. Yes, I am. My dad is half South African, Cliff responded. So you're probably British then, Jay replied. Cliff furrowed his brows and shivered his head as if the idea was ridiculous. What? The British colonized South Africa. No, that doesn't sound right, Cliff said, shaking his head. I heard that white skin in Africa is a recessive gene. We're like the ugly ducklings of black people there. There was an awkward pause. Jay raised his brows. Min and Sophie blinked in disbelief. That is an oddly racist self-burn, Jay muttered. Hi, I'm Ravi, Ravi said, reaching out to shake Sophie's hand. Sophie forced a tentative smile and shook his hand. Cliff smiled, gesturing to Ravi. Ravi's Arabic, Cliff said, but don't worry, his family doesn't have a history of being terrorists. Jay shut his eyes and shook his head in shame. I'm actually Indian, Ravi said, still shaking Sophie's hand. It's nice to meet you. Sophie blinked and nodded. Cliff motioned to Jay as he shook Sophie's hand. This is Jay. Some sort of redneck hipster from San Francisco. He's gay, Cliff said. Jay snapped his head to Cliff, his eyes wide. What? Jay asked indignantly. Stop telling people that I'm gay. Cliff rolled his eyes at Jay and then motioned to Min. And this is Min, representing our great friends from China, he said. Min's Korean, Ravi said. Oh, that's right, sorry, Cliff said, chuckling, but don't worry, she's from the good part of Korea, the southern part, I mean. Did you know they eat dog over there? Ravi shook his head. You're thinking of a small minority of people in China, he said. They don't eat dog in Korea. Oh, is that right? Cliff asked, furrowing his brows at Ravi and Min. Ravi nodded. Min blinked, her hands trembling and sweating. She nodded tentatively. My apologies, Cliff said, chuckling and putting his hands up in innocence. Min gulped, her mind running with doubt as she glanced at Sophie. Oh my God! I'm so going to mess this up. She already disapproves of us for being late. Jay grimaced. We're so sorry about Cliff. He can be outdated and offensive. It's nice to meet you, Jay said, shaking Sophie's hand. Sophie grimaced and nodded at Jay before then looking to Min. She flashed a smile at her. Min smiled weakly back, her hands shaking and cold. Well, it's nice to finally meet another woman in engineering, Sophie said with a chuckle, outstretching her hand to Min. Min blinked and shook Sophie's hand, her mind racing. Oh, crap! Wait, what did she just say? Did she ask how I was? Oh, crap! Just say something! Min gave a high-pitched, nervous giggle. Oh, yeah, I'm doing great, thanks, she said. There was silence for a moment as Sophie cocked her head and furrowed her brows at Min awkwardly. Min's eyes widened as she looked around in horror. And also you! I mean, the weather is so hot today, isn't it? That's why my hand was so sweaty. Oh, God, but my hands were cold, too. Just change the subject. Change the subject. She gave another high-pitched laugh. I mean, it's such a nice day to have a meeting. Sophie blinked, a brow still lowered. Yeah, definitely, she said, nodding and blinking. Min winced. Oh, God, that was a disaster. Sophie turned and motioned for everyone to follow her. So, anyways, follow me to our conference room, Sophie said. We can discuss things there. Min cringed at herself and hung her head in shame. They all followed Sophie inside the office building and down the hallway. Sophie's a sexy fox, Cliff muttered to Ravi, a devious smile on his face. Sophie looked back at him over her shoulder. What was that? She asked, her brows raised. Oh, nothing. I just like your socks, Cliff said, gesturing to her feet and forcing a chuckle. Sophie lowered a brow in confusion. Okay, thanks, she said in half confusion. She turned back and led them into a conference room. Smooth, Jay muttered to Cliff, unimpressed. Ravi narrowed his eyes and nodded at Cliff, giving him an okay sign with his thumb and forefinger. Very smooth, he whispered. Cliff smiled and nodded. Everyone took their seats around the conference room table with Sophie at the end of the table and Cliff and Jay closest to her but on opposite sides. The conference room had a television screen mounted on the wall, as well as 2 large whiteboards with engineering sketches and specifications listed there. Small plastic water bottles and maroon-colored business cards lay on the table in front of each open seat. A small aluminum part lay at the center of the table. Min assumed it was the part the company was looking to have made. My business card is on the table. Help yourselves to some water if you'd like, Sophie said, gesturing to the water bottles on the table. Great, thanks, Jay said, flashing Sophie a smile. He took out his wallet and passed his own business card to Sophie. Here's my card. Feel free to call me anytime, Jay said, giving her a charming smile. Sophie flashed a smile back at him and nodded. Okay, great, she said. Cliff opened his own wallet and slowly looked through the different pockets. Jay, Min, Ravi, and Sophie stared at him. Mine's around here somewhere. Hold on, Cliff muttered to Sophie. He fumbled the wallet upside down and a large stack of $100 bills, fancy gift cards, and credit cards clattered onto the table. Oh, whoops! Sorry about that. 1 second, he said, looking up and smiling at Sophie. Sophie grimaced and nodded. Cliff started counting out every $100 bill. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. Ah, good. They're all there, Cliff said, smiling. He glanced up at Sophie to make sure she was watching. Jay rolled his eyes. Cliff put each item back in the wallet before stopping to look at the most obvious front pocket where his business cards were kept. Ah, and here's my card, he said, passing Sophie his own business card. Feel free to call me anytime, including holidays, Cliff said, beaming at her. In fact, here's another card just in case, he said, handing her another business card. Cliff gestured to the cards. As you can see, they're custom-made from a premium cardstock with a quality embossed lettering, reflecting my premium quality service, he said proudly. Sophie blinked in shock. Okay, she said, shifting in her seat uncomfortably. Jay rolled his eyes. Sophie cleared her throat. So, let me start by telling you what we're looking to make, Sophie said, scooting her chair slightly away from Cliff. She cleared her throat again and slid the aluminum part on the table closer to her. At the moment, we're interested in having these parts made. They're made of aluminum, Sophie said. Jay smiled. Well, you're in good hands since we have a good range of metal printing options, he said. He reached forwards to take the part from Sophie, but Cliff leaned forwards and swiped it from her. Jay scowled. But I'm sure you're looking to have them printed with plastic instead? Cliff asked Sophie, his eyes alight. Sophie blinked, looking at Cliff. Well, no, they need to be made with aluminum. I don't think any plastic option would fit our durability and tensile stress requirements. Cliff frowned. Well, perhaps I can help then, Jay said, reaching across the table and swiping the part from Cliff. Cliff glared at Jay. Sophie turned to look at Jay. Jay examined the part in his hands, then glanced up at Sophie. So directional strength properties with our SLM machines is unmatched, he started, gesturing to her. Sophie furrowed her brows. Oh, okay, what does SLM stand for? She asked. Stupid loser machine, I bet, Cliff muttered under his breath. It's selective laser melting, Jay said. Sophie nodded. Oh, okay, she said. Cliff shook his head, glowering at Jay. Jay ignored Cliff and pulled out a SLM printing brochure from his portfolio and handed it over to Sophie. Here is a technical brochure of that standard material and the printing process for you to look at, Jay said. How many pieces are you looking to have made? He asked. We'd need 500 made, Sophie answered. Jay nodded. Okay, so given this part's size, it'd probably take about 10 to 12 hours to print each one. So in that case, I just need a few weeks of lead time from when the order is purchased to have that many parts sent to you. Okay, that sounds feasible, Sophie said, nodding. She looked back down at the brochure, reading it for a moment. A frown creased her lips. Okay, actually, these standard aluminums won't work, Sophie said, shaking her head. The tensile stress doesn't meet our requirements. Jay's brows raised. Oh, really? He asked. Yeah, our application requires a particular factor of safety with the dynamic loads it experiences, Sophie said. She pointed to the whiteboard on the sidewall. Here's some of the requirements on the whiteboard. Min frowned, looking at the requirements written on the whiteboard. Her mind percolated with panicked questions. Oh, no! Could the material we need be in the handbook that Jay abandoned back at the office? Min gulped as she watched Jay nodding at Sophie. Oh, okay, Jay said. So you're looking to use one of the premium metals? Let me pull out that handbook. We haven't had many clients ask about these, he said. Jay reached down into his bag, pulled out his binder, and placed it on the table. After a few seconds, he flicked back and forth through a few handbook pages. His eyes widened. Uh-oh, he muttered. Everything okay? Sophie asked. Crap. I may have left the necessary handbook at the office. Jay rechecked his bag frantically. Min's eyes widened, her breath quickening. Damn it! I was right! Why didn't I just take that handbook for myself? Jay continued to look through his bag, gulping. Sorry, I should have checked before we left. Jay licked his lips. Min had never seen him this nervous. She pursed her lips in worry. "Nice going, Jay," Cliff said, glaring at him. "First your car, now this." He scoffed. Jay chuckled nervously. "Ha, it's nothing, he's just being stupid." Sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked up at Ravi, his eyes frantic. "Ravi, do you have the handbook we need?" Jay asked desperately. Ravi gave a slight frown and shook his head. "I don't on those particular aluminums." Jay gulped. Okay, is it maybe downloadable somewhere?" Jay asked. Ravi grimaced. "Well, there's quite a few different brands with random product numbers, so it'd take a while to find the particular ones we're looking for," he said with a frown. "I'll try looking, though." Ravi pulled out his phone and began typing away on it. Jay blinked, grimacing. He looked desperately from Ravi to Min. Cliff had a smug smirk on his face. Min's heart beat fast. "Oh, God, do I have any ideas? What is a material that has such a high tensile strength?" Suddenly, a light bulb went off in Min's head. "My flashcards!" Min's eyes widened as she recalled a few particular flashcards she had looked through earlier in the morning. "Oh, my God, do I know this?" Min thought to herself frantically. She closed her eyes and recalled a particular material with a high tensile stress. "Wait, Ti-64 titanium! That might work!" Min's hands began trembling as she looked at the engineering requirements written on the whiteboard. "But what if this is the wrong one? What if I mess this up?" she thought. Min watched as Sophie frowned at Jay in disappointment. "You have to say something, Min, before it's too late." Min's heart pounded. Cliff chuckled darkly at Jay, shaking his head. "Okay," Sophie said, grimacing a frown at Jay. "I think we can stop here." Min raised a trembling hand. "Wait, I think I know a material you could use," she said, her voice steady. Everyone looked to her. Cliff and Sophie raised their brows in interest. "Oh, okay. Go ahead, Min," Sophie said, nodding. Min gulped. Her conscience spoke to her. "Remember what Jay said? Just take a breath and trust your gut." Min took a calm breath and narrowed her eyes, trying to remember what she had read that morning. "Okay, well, from what I've read, if we use selective laser melting, we can use the Ti-64 titanium. It's in the correct range for your application." Min closed her eyes and winced in concentration, trying to picture the information. It has a Young's modulus of 104 gigapascals, a shear modulus of 40 gigapascals, a yield stress of 900 megapascals, and an ultimate stress of 920 megapascals, which would be enough to cover the stress requirements. Sophie raised her brows, clearly impressed. Cliff gave Min a small smile and nodded. "Wow. You had that memorized?" Jay asked, his own brows raised. Min's cheeks blushed pink. "Well, I studied up on things before this morning." "Wow, seriously?" Jay asked. Min shrugged. "Well, my mom wanted me to be able to recite the materials science book backwards to make sure I could stand out. She's hardcore Asian," Min said with a grimace. "But I just stuck to reading it forwards and making flashcards, though," Min said with a shrug. Ravi resumed typing on his phone. He paused and nodded. "Okay, here I found a company's specification sheet for that material Min mentioned," he said, holding up the phone to Sophie. He handed it over to her. Sophie looked at the phone and began nodding as she scrolled through. Cliff looked at Min with a slight smile. Sophie looked back up at everyone. "Well, if this is the case," she said, looking between Min and Jay, "that would work. How about we start with a small order of these parts today, and then we can scale up from there depending on how it goes." Jay blinked for a moment before recomposing by smiling and nodding. "Oh, absolutely. I'll draw up a quote at the office, and we'll send you a few sample parts after they leave the machine so you can let us know what you think." "Okay, great," Sophie said, smiling and nodding. "Just one thing. What would your initial estimate per part be?" Jay hesitated for a moment, his face paling slightly. This price estimate could determine whether or not they would have their business. Min's heart skipped a beat. She bit the inside of her lip. Well, it'll probably be somewhere around $300 per part, Jay said. Sophie looked down at the part, pausing for a moment to think. She gave a slight frown and then looked up back at Jay. Okay, I'll run it upstairs with the rest of management, but that should work, she said, nodding. Jay smiled in relief. Sophie looked over to Cliff. And since I have you here, Cliff, I could mention that we always have plastic parts, which we may be looking to have 3D printed. Provided that these initial prints go well, of course. Cliff grimaced a small smile and nodded. Sounds fine, he said somewhat reluctantly. And I'm sorry if I was offensive or came on a little strong earlier. It's been a stressful day. Mostly thanks to Jay. Jay sighed and shook his head. Sophie flashed Cliff a smile and nodded. She stood and smiled, glancing at everyone else. Well then, it was nice to meet all of you, she said. Yeah, we'll be in touch, Jay said, shaking her hand. Min smiled and shook Sophie's hand. It was nice to meet you too, she said, her voice soft. And you as well, Min, Sophie said, returning Min's smile. You were right. It was indeed a nice day to have a meeting. Min pursed her lips and blushed. Chapter 4. Greg, Lee, Amy, and Maria sat at their desks in the main room, looking at their computer screens. Greg set down his phone and exhaled. Okay, we've reached the end of the list. Great work, everyone, he said, smiling at them all. Lee sighed in relief. Greg joyfully jaunted to a whiteboard which hung against the wall. He picked up a black marker and a red marker. That's $3,000 worth of fake penises we sold, Greg said, his voice upbeat. He uncapped the black marker and wrote New Business in large letters at the top of the board. Then he drew a tall, skinny rectangle from top to bottom. He wrote $1 million at the top and $0 at the bottom. Greg then set down the black marker and uncapped the red marker. So we've got, well, what's 3,000 divided by 1 million? Greg asked, narrowing his eyes at them. Lee punched the numbers on his calculator. 0.003, he said, his voice depressed. Okay. Hey, so we're already 0.3% of the way to our goal, Greg said enthusiastically. He turned back to the whiteboard and drew a sliver of a line with his red marker. Look at that progress we've made, Greg said, his eyes alight. Everyone groaned. Maria shook her head, grimacing. Amy closed her eyes and hung her head in defeat. This is exciting, isn't it? Greg said, smiling. Now we only have, what, just $997,000 to go. Lee exhaled and leaned forward, hitting his forehead on the table with a dull thud. Ow, he mumbled. Let's just hope Jay and Cliff were able to make some sort of sale, Amy muttered, shaking her head. Everyone except Greg grimaced. Greg saw their fading morale and continued his upbeat attitude. Well, you can turn those frowns upside down because in light of our good work, I've ordered us some pizza. Everyone slowly looked up at him and grimaced weak smiles. Cool, thanks, Lee muttered, nodding. At least we can enjoy the taste of defeat, Maria said, grimacing. Greg put his hands on his hips. Come on now. Let's all stay positive. I'm sure Cliff and Jay will come back with just the good news we need. Maria grimaced and nodded. Lee and Amy grimaced and nodded as well. Can there not be any sausage on the pizzas, though? Amy asked, her voice tired. I think I've seen more than enough sausages today, she said, pointing to her computer monitor, which displayed a penis in a 3D modeling program. Also, I'm still a vegetarian, Amy added. Well, it's just cheese and pepperoni, Greg said with a shrug. Everyone shrugged and nodded. Greg's expression brightened again. Okay, well, you all stay calm. I'll pick up those pizzas and be back in a jiff, Greg said happily, skipping out the front door, car keys in hand. Maria bit her lip in worry and turned to Lee and Amy. Do you think they're going to get the sale? She asked. Amy frowned. Well, if they don't, honestly, I don't think I'd mind being fired, she said. I've always wanted to get back to volunteering and making a difference to humanity. Amy sighed, her eyes filling with tears. Every night I look at my cats and wonder what I'm doing with my life. Just answering phones all day and then coming home to them. Amy choked up in emotion. I should be doing so much more. Maria frowned and patted her on the back. And Katy Purry died on me last week. Amy pouted. Oh, she did? Maria asked, her voice soft. Amy nodded, teary-eyed. She was the one that got away, she said, wiping away her eyes, her voice cracking. So young. Lee shrugged. Well, her music really wasn't that good, was it? So it's not a total loss, he said. Amy shook her head angrily, her blonde hair swirling around her face. No, not the singer. Katy Purry was my calico cat. See? Amy shoved her phone in front of Lee and Maria's faces, showing them her phone's background image. A calico cat was dressed in a felt baby blue shark costume, visibly uncomfortable with its head poking out of the felt shark's mouth. A beaming, happy Amy was holding the cat and kissing it on the head. Oh, sorry for your loss, Lee said, grimacing in guilt. Maria glared at Lee while continuing to pat Amy in comfort. And don't ever slander Katy Perry like that, Lee, Maria said, her nostrils flaring at Lee. She's always been an effortless singer and a great performer. Right. Sorry about that, too, Lee said, nodding at her in guilt. He turned back to Amy, his brows lowering in confusion. But why did you name your cat Katy Purry? Lee asked. That was her name when I got her from the shelter, Amy said, appearing hurt. I've gotten all my cats from the Euthanasia Animal Shelter. Well, except Fluffy. He was homeless and just wandered in. Maria's brows raised. Wait, Euthanasia Shelter? She asked. No, Youth in Asia, Amy said. They're a charity that benefits the underprivileged in Asia. Oh, I see, Maria said, nodding slowly. Amy nodded and continued. Yeah, they're a really good, humane place. Lee nodded. What are your other cats' names, then? Amy's eyes lit up in excitement. Well, Katerine Zeta and Audrey Hepburn are my oldest, Amy said, cracking a teary-eyed smile. But Meow Cole Jordan is a really good jumper. Wow, that shelter really likes punny names, Lee muttered under his breath. Yeah, but Meow Cole Jordan has a really nasty temper sometimes, Amy continued, looking between Maria and Lee. Like yesterday, he tried fighting Audrey Hepburn over the food bowl again, so I stopped him, but then he scratched my arm. Amy sighed and shook her head. She pulled up her sweater's sleeve to reveal a deep scratch on her forearm, which had scabbed over. Maria winced and groaned at the sight. Lee's brows raised. I guess he took that personally, he said. Amy nodded. Yeah, he's kind of a bowl hog. I'm trying to get him to work through his selfishness. Oh, that's nice, Maria said, flashing a smile. At that moment, the office door opened. Everyone turned to look. Jay, Cliff, Ravi, and Min walked through the door, chatting animatedly. Hey, how'd it go? Amy asked, raising her brows hopefully. Cliff smiled and nodded. Well, we got an order, he said, happily. No thanks to Jay, of course. Jay grimaced a forced smile. Oh, nice job, guys, Amy said, her eyes lighting up. Maria beamed at them, while Lee's expression glowed in hope. Well, it was really all thanks to Min here, Cliff said, gesturing to Min. Ravi nodded. Yeah, when Jay forgot his handbook, Min had the data memorized, he said. Jay grimaced. Wow, great job, Amy said, beaming and giving Min a high five. Oh, no, it was nothing, Min said shyly. Ah, don't be modest, Cliff said, pooh-poohing Min. You showed everyone just how useless Jay is. How big of a sale was it? Maria asked, her eyes sparkling with hope. Cliff beamed. Well, at $300 per piece for 500 pieces, that's about a $150,000 sale, he said. Maria's eyes widened as she looked to Lee and Amy. Do you think that'll be enough to keep our jobs? She asked. Lee punched more numbers into his calculator and grimaced. Well, that'll get us only 15.3% of the $1 million we need, but maybe it will keep us afloat for some time, he said, his voice tinging hopeful. Jay shrugged. Well, Sophie did say she might have more business for us, he said. Lee's eyes widened. Oh, that's good then, right? He said, looking to Maria and Amy. Cliff smiled. Oh, it's good all right, because I've got Sophie's number. That hot, lovely young... Jay rolled his eyes. Yeah, she just gave us her business card. Cliff glared at Jay. After a few minutes, Greg returned with boxes of pizza and liters of soda. I got pizza for everyone, he exclaimed as he walked into the office, pizza boxes in hand. Oh, wow, thanks, Min said, upbeat. Greg smiled back, setting the pizza boxes on an open table nearby. You are so very welcome, he said. So how did the meeting go? Well, we got a sale, Ravi said, smiling. Greg's eyes brightened. Oh, huzzah! Greg said, raising his arms with enthusiasm. I'll update our goal board. How much did we get? Greg asked as he skipped over to the whiteboard on the wall. Well, pending they like our samples, it'll be about 150,000. So 15.3% closer to the $1 million we need, Lee said. Greg turned back to them, alight with excitement. That's joyous news! He uncapped the red pen and filled the bar to about 16% of the way up. Look at that! We're a quarter of the way there already! Jay furrowed his brows. What? 16% is not even a sixth of the way there. Greg blinked for a moment and then frowned. Oh, right. Sorry, I was thinking in terms of time. Jay grimaced. Everyone went into the conference room to eat pizza and chat about the day. A small table was set up near the conference room door, where Greg had set down the pizzas and soda bottles. Jay walked to his desk, his expression taut with irritation. Damn it. Why the hell did I forget that stupid handbook? He wondered to himself. The handbook lay on his desk. Jay grimaced and picked it up. He searched through the pages until he found the data on the Ti 64 titanium. His eyes widened. Holy crap. Min actually was dead on with those specs, he said to himself. Wow. He looked back at Min in the conference room, who was talking animatedly to Amy and Maria. Jay frowned. There was something about Min. She was smart, and now that he thought of it, quite pretty. Damn. Maybe I should be more organized. Jay stuffed the handbook into his messenger bag and walked back inside the conference room, deciding to grab a slice of pizza. Min, Jay, Amy, Greg, Cliff, Ravi, Lee, and Maria all stood around the conference room, eating some pizza and chatting. The phone rang, causing the room to go silent. Amy reached over and picked up the phone. Hello, Macro Hard Industries, this is Amy, she answered. She listened for a few moments and nodded. Oh, hi, David, she said, her voice upbeat. Yes, he's right here. 1 second. Amy looked to Greg, covering the receiver. It's David from corporate, she whispered to him. Oh, yes, put it on speaker, Greg said happily. Okay, everyone quiet down, he said in a hushed voice. Amy nodded. She clicked the speaker button on the phone set and put the phone receiver she held back in its holder. Greg smiled and leaned over the table, speaking into the phone set. Hey, David, great news! We just got a new client and we made decent sales from some individual perverts. Now it won't be an immediate compensation for our old client, but I would say it's a very good start. Min heard David sigh. Look, that's good to hear, Greg. But I've got some bad news, David said. He paused, giving another tired sigh. I'm sorry to do this to you, but given everything that's transpired today, we're going to need you to let go of your new hire. Everyone's eyes widened in shock as they turned to stare at Min. Min's heart skipped a beat. David's voice continued. The truth is, we've been leaking money for months, and with that client lost from this morning, we're just not going to be able to afford another full-time salary. Greg's lips parted. For a moment, he tried to mouth his words, but none escaped his throat. What? Why? He finally stammered. There's no reason to do that since we're now on the right track, he said. Well, Crank Prince is taking more and more of our business, so we're really going to need to start making some cuts in order to be more price competitive with them, David answered grimly. Greg blinked for a moment in shock. Well, he started, his voice cracking. Damn it. Sorry, I've got to go. My wife is calling about our divorce. David interrupted with a sigh. She's such a whore. Anyways, I'll talk to you later. The line clicked off. There was a moment of silence. Greg stared at the phone for a moment. He looked up at everyone and cringed. I probably shouldn't have had that on speakerphone, he said, wincing. Everyone stared at Min. She blinked for a few moments as tears flooded her eyes. Well, it was nice getting to know you all, Min said, pursing her trembling lips. Amy's lips parted, her expression heartbroken. Oh no, Maria cooed, her own eyes tearing up. Min flickered a tremulous smile at them. She took a painful gulp. Have a good night, she said sadly. Everyone's expressions were a mixture of shock and heartbroken sadness. Min gulped through her clenched throat and walked to the conference room door. Min, wait, a low voice said. Min paused at the door and turned. To her surprise, she saw Cliff holding up his hand in a stop gesture. Min's brows furrowed. Cliff looked around the room at everyone. Guys, I just want to say that I'll take a pay cut, Cliff said, pointing to himself. Look, I know I've been here the longest and that I'm the most valuable person here, which of course makes me the least deserving to be so generous. But this job has given me purpose, independence, and a sense of belonging. And if taking a pay cut could help Min achieve the same, then I'm happy to do it. She showed me today what a smart, hardworking, and good kid she is. Min's heart warmed, tears dripping down her cheeks. Ah, thanks, Cliff, Min said, smiling at him, her voice trembling. You really don't have to do that, though. Cliff flashed a smile back at her and nodded. Yeah, I do, he said warmly, nodding. You deserve it, especially after saving us today. Jay grimaced and nodded. I'll take a pay cut, too, Jay said softly, looking at Min. I was the one who you saved, so as strange as it is to say this, Cliff is, right? You do deserve it. He looked to Greg and spoke lowly. The pay cut would only be temporary, right? I mean, we will make enough money to cover her eventually? Greg nodded and looked from Jay to Min. Yes, I think so. Regardless of what corporate says, we're on the right track. So, in that case, I'll take a pay cut too. He took a breath and nodded, casting his gaze down for a moment. I really should be responsible for my company and its employees. And if any one of you suffers, then I should too, Greg said, patting his chest. Min smiled at him, more tears falling down her cheeks. Greg grimaced at Min. Also, I'm sorry about swearing at you earlier today, he said. Min nodded and blinked through her tears. It's all right, she said softly, her voice cracking. I'll take a pay cut too, Amy said, smiling at Min. Me too, Maria said, nodding and smiling as well. Me three, Ravi said with a small smile. Lee gave a nervous shrug. You can take my whole paycheck if you want, he said nervously. Jay's eyes widened. Whoa, okay, that's a little overboard, Jay said, holding up his hand in an take-it-easy gesture. Cliff gave a small, half-chuckle, half-scoff. Yeah, there's no need to simp like that, Lee, Cliff said, shaking his head. It comes across as desperate and needy. He turned to Greg. But Greg, just make sure that you take the most from my salary, Cliff said, patting his chest. He held up his hands in innocence. It's all right. As you all know, I actually have more than enough money to spend. Greg looked at Cliff and nodded. Well, I think with all of us taking a small pay cut, we can more than make up for your salary, Greg said, looking back to Min, hopefully. Min gulped through the painful lump in her throat. Aw, you guys. You're too kind. I don't know what to say, Min said, sniffling and wiping at her eyes. Greg smiled. Just say that you'll stay, he said. Yeah, you fit in well with us, Jay nodded, smiling warmly at her. Min pursed her lips, unable to contain a smile. Okay, she said, beaming, her eyes still leaking tears. She wiped her eyes again with the back of her hand. "Thank you all so much." Amy and Maria said together. They stepped forwards and took turns hugging Min. Amy wiped at her own eyes as Min shook everyone else's hands. She began sniffling as more tears fell down her cheeks. "You okay, Amy?" Maria asked, touching her back. Min turned to look at Amy. Amy shook her head. "I lied about Meow Cold Jordan being selfish. I just don't think he likes me. I think that's why he scratches me," Amy said sadly, breaking down into tears. Min and Maria sung. They both patted her on the back. Lee broke down into crying sobs. "Well, I've been lying to you guys too," he pouted. "I don't actually have a girlfriend named Geralda. I just wanted to look cool in front of Jay and Cliff," he sobbed. "I'm so lonely at night. I don't want to die alone." Min and Amy chorused. Amy gave him a swirling pat on his back. Maria started sniffling, watching them. "Well," she said sadly, her voice cracking, "my mom has always been disappointed in me because I suck so bad at cooking. She tells me even my quesadillas suck. And all you have to do is put cheese in between 2 tortillas," she said, breaking down into tears. "They're like the easiest things to cook." Min, Amy, and Lee chorused, embracing Maria in a group hug. "Well," Greg said, his own voice cracking, "at holiday dinners, my mom and dad don't even bother to ask how I'm doing anymore. They just bask in my brother's achievements because he manages a successful law firm with his name on it. And they ignore me because all I've managed to do is run a small, stupid branch of a failing printing company." He sniffled. "Don't bother us until you're actually successful, is what they basically tell me with their ignorance." He broke down, crying into his hands. "I'm such a disappointment." Min, Amy, Maria, and Lee chorused again. They came up to him and patted him on the shoulder and back. Cliff sniffled, his own eyes tearing up. "Well, I wish I could be young like you guys with your whole lives ahead of you, and young enough to impregnate women," Cliff said, shaking his head, his voice hoarse. "I just want to start a family, but the doctors say I'm too old now." "Or you were always just impotent," Jay muttered under his breath. Cliff shook his head, continuing. "That's the reason why I got the SUV version of the Porsche. Just so I could fill it with children." He brought his hand to his eyes as his chest convulsed in painful crying. Min, Amy, Maria, Greg, and Lee chorused. They came up to him and patted him on the shoulder and back. Cliff nodded in thanks, still sniffling and teary-eyed. "Group hug, everyone, group hug," Greg said, tears falling from his cheeks. He opened up his arms and motioned everyone to bring it in. Everyone smiled and clambered together in a large group hug, tears streaking their cheeks. Jay stood outside the huddle, his brows furrowed, grimacing at each of them. He frowned, thinking of how he had messed up with the missing handbook earlier that day. He glanced to his left and saw Ravi seated at the table, watching the scene while eating from a bag of popcorn. Jay sat down at the table next to Ravi, frowning as he watched his sobbing and hugging co-workers. He glanced at Ravi. "Should we do anything?" Jay asked, furrowing his brows at Ravi. Ravi held up his hand. "Just watch. It's beautiful," he said, smiling at the scene. Jay watched for a moment before blinking and shaking his head. He glanced back over at Ravi. "I think we're the only sane ones here, Ravi," he said. Ravi continued watching everyone hugging and crying, a smile on his face. "You couldn't have written this any better," he said, continuing to smile. Jay blinked, looking back to watch the scene. "Okay, maybe I am the only sane one here," he muttered to himself. After a few minutes of crying in each other's arms, everyone calmed down and again seated themselves around the conference room table, chatting to each other. "Well, I've got a few hours to kill then," Maria said, shrugging. Ravi scrolled through his phone. "Yeah, traffic home is terrible right now, so I'll probably take a nap in my car," he said, shrugging as well. "Hey now, why don't we all stay and watch a movie?" Greg asked, gesturing to everyone. "We've all had a productive day, and I think we deserve something a little fun while we munch on our pizza." Ravi and Lee looked at each other and shrugged. "Sure, that sounds good," they said together. Jay frowned. Everyone else shrugged and nodded in agreement. Greg smiled and then walked to the DVD player where a stack of DVD boxes were and squatted down to look through them. Jay looked to Greg. "All right, I'll stay and watch, just as long as it's not High School Musical," he said. Greg pulled a DVD box from the stack and turned, a grin on his face. "It's High School Musical too," Greg said enthusiastically, showing the DVD box to them. "Oh, dear God," Jay said, closing his eyes in disappointment. Min chuckled. She walked to the table with the pizza and drinks, uncapped the large soda bottle, and refilled her cup. Jay walked up next to her with his own cup in hand. Min's cheeks tinged pink as she flashed a smile at him. Jay grimaced back a weak smile as he started pouring himself a cup of soda. Min was about to head back to her seat at the table when Jay spoke. "Hey, Min," Jay said. Min stopped, turned, and nodded at him. "Yeah?" she asked breathlessly. Jay set the bottle of soda down and grimaced. "Look, I just wanted to thank you for stepping in and helping me out there today." Min flashed a smile at him and nodded. "Oh, yeah, of course," she said kindly. Jay grimaced again and continued. "Truthfully, I probably could learn a few things about organization and preparation from you." Min flashed another smile and shrugged. "Well, I suppose there's always something we can do to improve ourselves. I mean, you helped me out too. I never would have spoken up without your advice on breathing and trusting myself. So, thank you." Jay blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, yeah," he said, smiling and nodding at her. "Well, that's good." They shared a long gaze. Min's heart fluttered and skipped a beat. Jay cleared his throat. They both looked away, chuckling in embarrassment. Min's cheeks blushed. "Cool, well, good talk," Jay said, flashing a strained smile. "I'm just going to go get another slice of pizza then," he said, gesturing behind him. "Yeah, definitely," Min said, blushing and curling her hair around her ear. Jay flashed a weak smile at her and quickly walked over to the pizza boxes. Everyone helped themselves to more pizza and then sat back down at one of the plush conference room chairs as Greg started the movie on the TV. Ravi leaned back against his plush chair, sipping on his drink. Min sat in the chair next to him. They smiled at each other. "So, can we say we're not in the darkest timeline or a living nightmare then?" Min asked, her voice hopeful. Ravi smiled, taking a sip from his soda cup. "The jury is still out, but I think we averted it today," he said, a small smile on his face. Min exhaled and nodded. "That's a relief," she said. Ravi nodded, but narrowed his eyes in thought. "We could still be in the Matrix, though. Even our Lord and Savior, Elon Musk, admits we might be living in a simulation." Min nodded. I think I'll have to watch that movie," she said. Ravi nodded. "Yeah, I've got it on Blu-ray. Let me know if you're ever interested. Or any other movie for that matter." Min smiled and nodded. "Cool, I may take you up on that offer." Lee, who sat next to Ravi, leaned forwards, his eyes alight in interest. "Actually, they also show older movies like The Matrix sometimes down at the $5 theater if you're interested," he said with a shrug. He froze, his eyes widening. "I mean, I wasn't interested in going with you," he said, pointing to himself. "Not that I wouldn't want to—" He winced. "What I mean is that you could go and watch it with someone. Or by yourself. Not me. I mean, I'm not asking you out," Lee said, raising his hands in innocence. He gulped and stood from his chair, backing away from Min. Lee cleared his throat. I'm just going to go check out the He snapped his fingers, looking for the words. "The Oval Office. No, I mean the Whiz Palace," he said, backing out the conference room door. Cliff furrowed his brows, watching him. Min smiled at Lee and nodded. "Oh, okay," she said. Cliff chuckled to himself. "You going to go 3D print out of your ass, Lee?" he shouted gleefully. Everyone shot him varying looks of disgust. "Oh, come on," he said irritably. "It's a relevant joke." From across the table, Min could see Jay shaking his head. Ravi yawned, laid his head on the table, and closed his eyes. Oh, man. I'm tired. Don't mind me if I doze off. I didn't get much sleep last night. Plus, I'm not the biggest fan of the High School Musical trilogy. Same here, Min said. Ravi opened his eyes and furrowed his brows at her. Min shrugged. I saw it with my mom since it was rated PG. Couldn't really relate to it. Ravi smiled and nodded. I really like Disney's animated movies, though, Min said, reminiscing with a fond smile. Ravi nodded, closing his eyes again. Me too, he mumbled, drifting off to sleep. Min turned back to watch the movie, a smile on her face. Chapter 5. Ravi felt a shake of his shoulder. Hey, Ravi, the movie's over, Lee said, picking up his soda cup and tossing it in the trash. Ravi blinked his eyes open and lifted his head off the table. He looked up and saw the credits rolling on the TV screen. Ravi rubbed his eyes and looked around the room. Everyone was sitting in different seats, chatting animatedly. Ravi looked to the chair next to him. Min wasn't there. He froze, narrowing his eyes as a sudden thought hit him. Wait, this wasn't all a dream, was it? He spun in his chair, looking around. Where is Min? Ravi's eyes widened, his heart skipping a beat. Oh my God! Is any of this real? He spun and looked to Jay, who was tossing a paper plate in the trash. Where's Min? Ravi asked Jay, his voice tense. Jay paused for a moment. He turned and furrowed his brows, his expression quizzical. Min? Who's Min? Ravi's eyes widened. Oh my God! He jogged out of the conference room and looked around. Min wasn't anywhere in sight. Ravi shook his head. This can't be. He reached into his pocket, brought out his Inception top, and flicked it into a spin on his desk. Jay walked by and glanced at Ravi before looking back down at his phone and tapping on it. He sat down in his desk's chair. Edith Piaf's Non je ne regrette rien began playing, echoing throughout the room. Ravi stared at the top intently, his eyes wide and unblinking. He heard another pair of footsteps approaching from behind him. Lee stopped beside Ravi and looked between him and the top. Lee's eyes widened. Whoa, what's going on? Lee asked, his voice fearful. Isn't that the kick music from Inception? Ravi looked around the room. Oh my God. It is, Ravi said, his voice hushed. Ravi pivoted and looked to the seated Jay, who continued to stare at his phone, scrolling through it casually. Jay, do you hear that music? Ravi asked, his eyes wide. Jay looked up at him and furrowed his brows. Music? The hell are you talking about? He asked as if they were crazy. Ravi turned to Lee, staring at him wide-eyed. Oh my God, I think we're trapped in a dream, Ravi said. Lee stared back, his own eyes bulging. Or a dream within a dream, he whispered in a hush. Ravi nodded. We could be, Ravi said in an intense, hushed voice. They both looked back at the Inception top. The top skimmed on an imperfection in the table's wood and wobbled. It's not falling. The song Non je ne regrette rien neared its end. Time was of the essence. Ravi glanced to Lee. Do you remember being drugged or drinking anything? Ravi asked. Lee frowned and narrowed his eyes. No, TBD didn't turn out to be a drug. Ravi gasped suddenly, his eyes widening. The soda! Someone could have spiked the soda! Lee's eyes widened. He brought his hands to the top of his head in disbelief. You're right, he said, his voice hushed. Ravi started shaking his head in disbelief. The song's ending. So, if this is a dream, we need to give ourselves a kick to get back to reality. Oh God, we have to kill ourselves, Lee asked, his eyes wide. Ravi shook his head. No, we're probably sedated, so in that case, we should fall down on the floor. Lee exhaled and nodded. Oh, thank God. Okay, ready? Ravi asked. Lee nodded, exhaling through his mouth. In 3, 2, 1, fall! They both fell sideways, hitting their shoulders hard on the carpet. The music stopped. Pain shot up Ravi's shoulder. He winced. Ow, Lee groaned. Jay chuckled, shaking his head at them. You guys are insane. he said. Ravi and Lee groaned as they got up off the ground. They looked up at the desk. The top was still spinning. Ravi gasped. "What the hell?" Lee whispered in a hush. "Oh, God, we might be in limbo," Ravi said, his eyes wide. Jay smirked. "Well, you're definitely not in this reality. That's for damn sure." Lee and Ravi ignored Jay and both exchanged another intense look. They resumed staring at the spinning top, holding their breaths. But the top wobbled and toppled, clattering to the table. Lee and Ravi closed their eyes and exhaled in relief. "Damn, you had me really worried there for a second," Lee said, shaking his head. "Yeah, me too," Ravi said, blinking. "Wait, so a girl named Min was here today, right?" he asked, his eyes narrowing at Lee. Lee frowned and nodded. "Yeah, of course. She went home early while you were asleep. She said she had to help her mom pick up some groceries." Ravi closed his eyes for a second and nodded in relief. He opened his eyes and caught Jay walking towards the front door, shouldering his messenger-style bag. Ravi furrowed his brows at Lee as a thought hit him. "Wait, where did that music come from, though?" he asked Lee. Lee frowned and looked to Jay. Ravi did the same. Jay paused at the door and looked back at them, smirking. He held up his phone and pointed to it. On the phone's screen was a Spotify playlist with a picture of Edith Piaf. "It's called Spotify," Jay said, chuckling to himself. He turned and pushed open the door, leaving the office with a grin on his face. "Nerds," he muttered, shaking his head with another chuckle. "Damn it, Jay," Ravi muttered, shaking his head. "You got us this time, you handsome little rascal." He looked to Lee. "Sorry, I was monologuing out loud again, wasn't I?" he asked. Lee grimaced and nodded. "Yeah." Ravi grimaced and sighed. "Right. Time to go then," he said. He picked up his Inception top, shouldered his backpack, and walked with Lee towards the front door. "Hey, are you planning on seeing the new Dune movie?" Ravi asked. Lee's eyes widened in excitement. "Oh yeah, I love Zendaya. Let's go see it," Lee said, his tone upbeat. "Sweet. I'll look into getting tickets," Ravi said as he pushed open the front door. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the book and have a minute to spare, I would really appreciate a short review on the page or site where you bought the book. Your help in spreading the word is greatly appreciated. Reviews from listeners like you make a huge difference to helping new readers and listeners find stories like this one. It will also help me gauge interest in a sequel. Also, feel free to check out my other works under my author name, J.T. Uyeda. Thanks.